The wind is older than we think. It moves across the steppe tonight, much as it did 10,000 years ago, soft, endless, and hungry for stories. Beneath that same wind once rode empires without borders, peoples whose kingdoms were made of motion, and whose monuments were the shifting herds and the smoke of campfires fading into dawn. I'm glad you're here. Wishing you peace, rest, and maybe a little historical inspiration before sleep. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. The grass bends, sighing like the tide. That's where our story begins. In the open world, before cities, before walls, before even the idea of staying still. Out here, sound carries far, and memory even farther. When the glaciers finally retreated at the end of the last ice age, the steppes stretched like an ocean of green from the Carpathians to Mongolia. Herds of wild horses, bison, and antelope grazed under skies so wide they almost hummed. Humans followed them, at first walking, then learning the pattern of the herds, then the rhythm of the seasons, until moving itself became their culture. Archaeologists find the faint traces, ash circles where fires once burned, long bones cracked for marrow, patterns of settlement that aren't really settlements at all. The first pastoralists didn't need walls or temples. Their shrines were the stars, their timepiece the sun. They followed its rising toward fresh pasture, its setting toward safety. To be alive was to move. That may sound romantic, but it was hard, dangerous, and breathtakingly efficient. Somewhere around 6000 BCE, people of the Western Steppe began to understand something extraordinary, that the animals they hunted could become companions. They began penning wild sheep and goats, then cattle. But it was the horse, untamed, muscled lightning, that changed everything. The first to ride didn't set out to build empires. They were just chasing speed, perhaps chasing a herd, perhaps fleeing one. Yet in that moment, humanity's geography expanded. When archaeologists look at the Botai culture of Kazakhstan, they find clues: bit wear on horse teeth, residues of mare's milk in ancient pottery. It's a quiet miracle, really. From that partnership came new maps, drawn not on paper, but on endurance. A rider could scout 10 times farther than a walker. He could gather herds, raid neighbors, deliver messages, and bring back news of horizons no one had seen before. The steppe became both road and homeland, and with mobility came myth. Sky gods became important. Tengri, the eternal blue, the unseen witness of every oath. The horse became sacred, its sweat a perfume of freedom. Death itself was seen as a journey. The Kurgan tombs scattered across the grasslands were built like miniature worlds: chariots, weapons, food, and ornaments, buried so that the dead might ride forever through the afterlife. These were not nomads, as later civilizations dismissed them, but engineers of impermanence, whose social order relied on kinship rather than bricks. They had a strange advantage. While farmers worried about drought and flood, the pastoralists read the wind. They could vanish in a day, appear 100 miles away, and reappear like ghosts at dawn. Every motion trained for survival. Women weaving felt for tents, men crafting bows of horn and sinew that could kill at a full gallop. Children learned to ride before they could walk. A steppe camp at sunrise must have been a mesmerizing sight. Smoke curling, horses stamping frost. distant songs blending with the lowing of cattle. For outsiders, this world seemed chaotic. To the nomads, it was order itself, an order measured by migration and return. They knew every stream, every windbreak, every whisper of the grass. When ancient farmers saw these moving nations, they called them barbarians. But those same barbarians had calendars in their bones. By the late Neolithic, the steppes had become a vast network of movement and trade. Copper, obsidian, and flint passed hand to hand, along with stories. Some scholars believe that the Indo-European languages, the ancestors of Latin, Sanskrit, Persian, and English, spread from these very riders. Imagine that. The words you're hearing right now might carry the echo of hooves from 7,000 years ago, but language is only part of it. The deeper legacy is the idea that power doesn't have to be tied to a place. The first empires of motion were not carved in stone, but traced in wind. They taught that territory can be measured not in acres, but in reach, and that leadership can ride beside you rather than sit upon a throne. Even the mysteries of their migrations still puzzle scholars. Genetic traces show waves of movement, north to south, east to west, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent, often both. A people could vanish into the grass and reappear centuries later under another name, their ancestry braided like rope. Every burial mound we open now reveals something familiar, yet alien. The same longing, the same attempts to honor the dead, the same artistry carved into bone or cast in bronze. As we drift through this beginning, imagine lying beside a campfire under a sky unbroken by cities. The stars are so bright they seem to sing. Somewhere nearby, a horse exhales, steaming in the cold. The oldest lullaby of humanity is the wind across grass, and the oldest empire is the one we still feel when we look toward an open horizon. That empire had no flag, no palace, yet it shaped every kingdom that came after. In a moment, the horse will take its first true step into history, and the step will awaken with sound, the rhythm that will carry us through millennia of riders, empires, and echoes. But for now, breathe in the quiet. The story is only beginning, and the horizon still glows gold with dawn. The first time a human grasped a horse's mane and didn't fall was the instant the world shrank. Suddenly, distance was different. The curve of the earth became a reachable thing. The next horizon, only a few hours away. That bond between hoof and heartbeat, between human and animal, was the ignition spark of every nomadic empire to come. The horse wasn't merely transport, it was transformation. Archaeologists see the traces, hoofprints hardened into fossil, teeth scarred by primitive bits, the faint coasts of corrals near ancient rivers. Around 3500 BCE, in the northern grasslands of Eurasia, people of the Botai and Yamnaya cultures began to do something extraordinary. They turned the wild terror of the horse into partnership. It wasn't immediate. Horses were still skittish, their instincts sharp, their eyes wide with memory of wolves. But humans learned their rhythm. The way a herd follows one. The way fear can be softened with food. The way movement itself can be a conversation. Picture that first rider. A figure of fur and bone, hair tangled by wind, gripping a woven thong around the horse's neck. The gallop must have been terrifying, ecstatic, unthinkably free. It's hard not to imagine the laughter that followed, echoing across the plain. Every step after that was history speeding up. With horses came herds that could move farther, faster. People learned to pack tents of felt and skin to carry their lives on sledges or carts. Their homes folded, their altars were portable, their gods followed them. The smell of mare's milk and smoke would cling to everything, a sensory memory that still lingers in Central Asia today. The invention of riding also brought a new form of warfare. Before horses, battle was a slow push of bodies. After horses, it became a dance, swirling, vanishing, reappearing. A skilled rider with a bow could strike before his enemy even saw the arrow. Nomads learned to shoot backward while galloping away, turning retreat into ambush. This was not chaos. It was art honed by centuries of survival, but the horse was more than a weapon. It was a bridge. On its back, tribes once separated by hundreds of miles could trade, marry, or feud. Goods and gossip moved with the same rhythm. Bronze daggers from the Caucasus reached the Altai. Seashells from Iran found their way into the Ural steppe. Even myths began to merge. Sun gods rode fiery chariots, and the Milky Way was reimagined as the track of celestial herds. Every evening, as fires crackled and horses grazed nearby, the people of the steppe told stories that mirrored the motion of their lives. They spoke of a sky father who rode the winds, of a mare who birthed the first humans, of souls that galloped to the afterlife. Their priests were dreamers, their calendars written in stars. And amid this spiritual web, the horse became a symbol of the soul's journey. Swift, restless, and unstoppable. Scientists still debate when and how the first bit was used. The boneware suggests a simple rope or rawhide loop, nothing elegant. But what it achieved was beyond elegance. It let one creature guide another without words. It's a relationship that feels anciently modern, a balance of power and trust, domination and dependency. As these early riders expanded, they met farmers from the south, the settled, the rooted, the people of walls. Those meetings were rarely gentle. To the farmers, nomads seemed like windstorms, arriving suddenly and taking what they wished. To the nomads, the farmers seemed imprisoned, earthbound, unable to dance with the seasons. Between them grew an eternal rhythm of envy and fear. The plow and the hoof, opposites, yet bound forever. When the Yamnaya spread westward into Europe, they carried with them more than tools and herds. They brought a new genetic and linguistic pulse that still hums in many of us today. Their burial mounds, the kurgans, mark that journey like a dotted trail across continents. Inside, bodies rest curled beside horses, weapons, and ornaments of copper. They believed the afterlife was another horizon to ride toward, a field of endless grass. This expansion was not conquest in the modern sense. It was migration by instinct. Pasture called, and people answered. Over generations, these moving clans reshaped the demographic map of the old world. Where they passed, cultures shifted, myths fused, languages blurred. The whisper of their hooves is still audible in Indo-European words like equus for horse, ancestor of the Latin equus, the Sanskrit ashva, and even the English equine. A single root sound, spoken thousands of years ago beside a fire, now echoes in 100 modern tongues. But not all mysteries are linguistic. One unsolved question lingers. How did they manage the logistics of life in perpetual motion? Recent studies of ancient DNA and isotopes show that even in this nomadic swirl, they maintained intricate social structures, hierarchies of kinship, alliances sealed by exchange of daughters and stallions, and even specialized craftsmen who traveled with elite clans. The steppe was never a void. It was an invisible network of trust and trade, maintained not by walls, but by promises. At times they paused. In fertile valleys, camps became semi-permanent. Grass was cut and stored, pottery styles diversified. But the restlessness always returned, the need to move when the wind shifted or the snow grew thin. That motion became almost biological, a rhythm encoded in the bones. It's what later Greeks and Persians would romanticize and fear, the people who couldn't stop riding. By 2500 BCE, the horse had reshaped the destiny of Eurasia. Chariots would soon follow, a mechanical extension of this union, a wheeled thunderbolt drawn by muscle and will. Yet even before those wheels touched earth, the horse had already become a symbol of cosmic movement, the very image of time. Imagine now that you're lying on the edge of that ancient camp. The air smells of frost and smoke. Somewhere beyond the circle of light, a mare stamps and whinnies, sensing wolves. You hear the whisper of a song, low, repetitive, hypnotic, a lullaby to calm both humans and beasts. The fire's glow flickers on leather harness and bronze bit, each gleam a prophecy of empires unborn. The rider strokes the horse's neck and looks toward the darkness, where the next dawn waits. The partnership they've forged will carry armies, religions, and languages across half the planet. But for this one heartbeat in history, it's just two creatures breathing the same cold air, both half wild, both dreaming of open space. Dawn arrives slowly over the grasslands, the horizon blushing pale gold before the sun finally spills its warmth across the open world. The tents shimmer with dew. Horses stir, tails flicking at invisible flies, their breath steaming in the chill. People begin to move quietly, gathering embers, shaking sleep from their bones, listening to the same endless wind that once told them when to stay and when to wander. The rhythm of life on the steppe is not marked by clocks, but by hooves. That steady, living percussion echoing beneath the sky. The tribes who now roam these lands, from the Dnieper in the west to the Altai in the east, live by an intricate harmony of movement and patience. They are not yet empires, not yet conquerors. They are families, herders, and survivors. They call themselves many names we no longer remember, yet they share one reality, that their horizon never ends. Their map is drawn by instinct, the trail of rivers, the smell of rain, and the shimmer of distant grass. Their lives might appear simple, but simplicity here is precision. Every motion matters. Where to place the herds so they graze but do not strip the land. How to dismantle a yurt before the wind rises. Which horses to tether near the fire at night to deter wolves. The social fabric is woven tight. Elders who remember every migration route. Warriors who ride not for glory, but to protect herds. And storytellers who carry the past in words softer than the dawn itself. When the sun climbs higher, riders scatter outward like spokes of a great wheel, scanning the grass for danger or pasture. The steppe from afar seems empty, a silence of grass and sky. But in that silence lives movement, and in that movement, meaning. To live here is to understand that stillness can kill. Each family drives its herds, cattle, goats, sheep, and above all, horses, through this living ocean. The animals feed them, clothe them, define them. Milk becomes kumis, the fizzy, sour drink that still tastes like ancient air. Leather and bone become tools. Dung fuels their fires when wood is rare. Nothing is wasted because the steppe allows no waste. By night, the camp becomes a tiny constellation of fires. Children fall asleep to the sounds of horses breathing, the far-off laughter of riders returning, the faint rhythmic chanting of elders telling stories under the stars. The stories are full of sky gods, ancestors and spirits that guard the herds. They teach respect, not through obedience to law, but through balance. Every life depends on the weather's mood, and every decision ripples outward like the gallop of 1,000 hooves. The gods of these people are not distant. They are in the wind, the storm, the flash of lightning across the horizon. The great sky spirit, Tengri, watches all. His consort, Umai, protects mothers and children. When a storm rolls across the plains, some tribes whisper that Tengri is riding his celestial stallion, checking whether humans still remember humility. The thunder is the sound of his hooves, the rain his blessing or warning. Bronze has begun to glint in this world, a magic metal stronger than anything before. It is smelted in small furnaces carried on carts, molded into daggers, arrowheads, and ornaments that flash like the sun. Archaeologists call these people part of the Bronze Age steppe cultures. The Yamnaya, Afanasyevo, Catacomb, and later Andronovo. Each is a verse in the long poem of motion. They trade, they migrate, they evolve, leaving behind bones, pottery, and weapons that speak of both artistry and violence. The Andronovo, in particular, fascinate modern scholars. Emerging around 2000 BCE across the western Siberian plains, they are the masters of both fire and movement. Their settlements, if they can be called that, cluster along rivers and lakes. Yet their graves tell a different story. Chariots buried with wheels upright, as if ready to roll again. Horses laid beside the dead, their bits still between their teeth. The chariot is a new kind of magic, a portable storm. Once again, the steppe finds a way to turn distance into dominion. It's easy to imagine an Andronovo morning. The metallic clang of tools, the smell of sweat and horsehide, the rhythmic whistle of a bowstring being tested. Young riders learn to guide the new spoked-wheeled chariots across the uneven ground. 2 horses, then 4, pulling a small platform that skims the earth like a dragonfly. In motion, it is poetry. In war, it is terror. Civilizations to the south, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, will soon feel its rumble, but technology is only one part of their mystery. The Andronovo leave behind traces of rituals we can almost see but never fully grasp. Circles of stones where fires once burned, remains of offerings of cattle and perhaps humans. Some graves are painted with ochre. Others contain masks of bronze or horn. They believed, it seems, that death was a road to another pasture, and that every traveler needed companions, horses, chariots, weapons. To reach it, their myths travel far too. Many scholars suspect that echoes of their religion drifted into later Indo-Iranian faiths. The fire rituals, the sacred drink, perhaps an ancestor of the Vedic Soma, the sun chariot drawn by divine steeds, all shimmer with steppe origin. The nomads, though they wrote nothing down, left fingerprints in the mythologies of half the world. Meanwhile, their daily life remains tactile, human. The feel of felt between fingers, the creak of leather straps, the thrill of a successful hunt. Their tents are low and round, warm even in blizzard. Women tend fires and sing lullabies about stars and horses. Men repair arrowheads or braid main cords. There's laughter, teasing, flirtation, the timelessness of human closeness, even in endless space. The steppe night is an ocean of stars. No walls block the view, no smoke dims the sky. You can imagine lying there, feeling the smallness of your body against the infinity of the firmament, listening to a distant flute. Its music meant not for entertainment, but for calm, a rhythm of breath, of heartbeat, of earth itself. This is how they remember who they are. The Bronze Age steppe is, in essence, a quiet revolution, not of empire, but of motion turned into civilization. They do not build pyramids, yet they sculpt time. They do not found cities, yet they link continents. Their children's children will one day be Scythians, Persians, Huns, and Mongols. Every later empire of riders is already present here, in embryo, wrapped in felt and firelight. When dawn comes again, the riders will move on. The wheel tracks will fade, the ashes will scatter, and the grass will rise to erase their footprints. But the idea that freedom and power can coexist in movement will endure. For now, the only empire that exists is the sky, endless and blue, and beneath it, the quiet pulse of hooves across the waking earth. The horizon widens again, as if the earth itself inhales. The Bronze Age hums with the metallic scent of progress. Copper and tin married in fire. A technology that sings of both creation and destruction. In this age of burnished tools and wandering herds, one culture flickers like a phantom in the archaeological record, half known yet wholly magnetic, the Andronovo. Their shadow stretches from the Ural Mountains to western China, a vast belt of grass and fire that scholars still puzzle over. When you walk among their ancient burial mounds today, you find silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as if it remembers something. Shards of pottery lie where hands once shaped them. Horses' bones rest in patterns of ritual. And bronze daggers still glint beneath the soil, untarnished by millennia. The Andronovo people are gone, but their secrets remain in the dust. The way they traveled, the way they worshipped, the way they dreamed of eternity. These were not drifters without direction. Their migrations had logic, the choreography of survival. They followed rivers like the Irtish and Ob, always seeking the balance between grass and water. Their chariots, light, swift, spoked, carried them farther than any people before. Imagine the sound, twin horses pulling, wheels whirring like whispers of thunder, the driver leaning forward with hair streaming and bronze gleaming. The first time that wheel cut across the steppe, the world must have held its breath. Somewhere between myth and archaeology, the Andronovo stand as bridge builders, connecting east and west, old and new. Their graves tell us they loved symmetry, bodies laid facing sunrise, horses positioned like guardians, weapons balanced beside tools of peace. They honored both life and its leaving. To die was not to end, but to ride on. In that belief, perhaps, lay their calm. Andronovo artisans were masters of bronze. They cast axes with edges fine as thought, crafted mirrors that caught the sun, and fashioned ornaments of swirling animal forms, creatures both real and imagined. These steppe beasts, curling in eternal motion, would later inspire the animal style art of the Scythians and Sarmatians. It's as if the metal itself remembered the gallop. But their legacy isn't just aesthetic. It's linguistic, spiritual, and even genetic. The Andronovo horizon marks a turning point when Indo-Iranian languages began to emerge. Their riders likely spoke early dialects that would become Sanskrit and Avestan. They carried stories that evolved into Vedic hymns, names that would echo through Persian temples, and cosmic ideas that outlived their bones. The fire altar found in several Andronovo sites, simple circles of stone with charred residue, mirrors the rituals later described in the Rig Veda. To light fire, to keep it alive through night and storm, was both devotion and defiance. A statement that life endures the wind. Picture a night on the Kazakh steppe around 1800 BCE. The stars are mercilessly bright. A priest, or perhaps just a father, tends a small flame, murmuring words older than history. Around him lie the herds, sleeping in dark waves. The chariot wheels rest, half buried in frost. His breath curls upward, joining the smoke. And for a moment, it's easy to imagine he believes the sky is listening. There's a reason the Andronovo fascinate us. They feel like a mirror. Half farmers, half nomads, half seen, half gone. Their settlements suggest moments of pause. Semi-permanent villages with mud walls, clay ovens, and hearths. Yet their hearts belong to the open. When resources dwindled, they left without regret, taking their gods, their children, their memories. They remind us that civilization doesn't always need permanence. Sometimes, movement itself is the architecture. Modern scientists examine their bones for isotopes, for chemical ghosts of what they ate and where they moved. The results reveal vast distances, hundreds of kilometers between birth and death. These were people of motion so complete that stillness seems foreign to them. Even their art flows in spirals and loops, never static. To them, perhaps, rest meant imbalance. Still, the Andronovo world wasn't idyllic. Violence was part of their vocabulary. Some graves bear the marks of trauma. Others hold mass burials that whisper of raids or famine. Yet even in conflict, they carried ritual grace. A slain warrior might be buried with his enemies, horses laid between them as eternal peacekeepers. It's brutal, but strangely poetic. The idea that even death must keep moving forward. From this crucible of bronze and blood, legends would rise. The early Iranians would speak of heroes who rode fire chariots across the sky, wielding metal forged by divine smiths. Later, the Greeks would write of titans who gave humanity the gift of flame. Different tongues, same echo. The memory of the first people who learned to turn ore into motion. And then there's the greatest mystery: why they disappeared. Around 1200 BCE, their trails fade. The chariots stop rolling, the settlements grow silent. Some merged with tribes moving south into Iran and India, carrying language and myth. Others drifted east toward the Altai, where their descendants might become the earliest Saka or Scythians. Perhaps drought struck, perhaps the grass shifted, perhaps, as always, they simply followed the wind. When you stand today in the open steppe, where their fires once burned, it's impossible not to feel that faint hum of presence, a whisper of hooves, a breath of smoke. The grass moves like an ocean, the sky too vast to comprehend. Somewhere beneath your feet lies bronze that still glows faintly in the dark, an artifact of willpower and wonder. The Andronovo didn't build empires of stone. They built a civilization out of distance, the first to prove that the horizon could be home. Their chariots were their cathedrals, their fires, their scriptures. And even as the centuries turned and their names vanished, the rhythm they began, that pulsing, restless drive across the world, continued through every people who rode after them. So when the Scythians appear centuries later, fierce and adorned in gold, they're not a beginning, but a continuation. The next verse in a song that began with the first rider, the song of thunder beneath an endless sky, the song of the steppe. The grass parts again, whispering with the weight of centuries, and from the horizon comes a shimmer of gold and smoke. The Bronze Age riders have become legends. The Andro Novo have faded like sparks in the wind. Now the steppes are waking to a new power, one that gleams with artistry and rides with terrifying grace. The Scythians. Their arrival is not announced by cities or proclamations. It comes with a sound, the hiss of arrow flights, the drumbeat of hooves, the distant cry of riders singing to the wind. To the farmers of the Black Sea coast, they appeared like spirits, archers who struck unseen, who vanished before you could shout their names. Herodotus, writing centuries later, would call them a people who live in wagons, their homes rolling across the world like the clouds above them. He could not know how ancient that motion truly was. The Scythians inherited the steppe's oldest arts, the bow, the horse, the bronze, and the belief that the sky was alive. But they refined it into something almost theatrical. Their camps were small nations on the move, each wagon a home, each horse a living extension of its rider. They carried everything they needed: felt tents, carved furniture, golden ornaments, and weapons inlaid with bone. They wore trousers of dyed leather, tall pointed hats, and belts hung with knives. Even their tattoos told stories. Swirling beasts locked in combat, eternal motion etched into skin. Archaeologists still uncover them, these stories under the earth. In kurgans, great burial mounds that rise like islands across the Ukrainian and Kazakh plains, lie the frozen remains of Scythian nobles and their horses, perfectly preserved by the permafrost. Open one, and you find a world asleep. Warriors wrapped in fur and gold, faces painted with red ochre, quivers of arrows still full, harnesses decorated with tiny lions and stags. It is as if time itself paused to honor their pride. Their art is unmistakable. Known as the animal style, it's a dance of predators and prey, panthers biting deer, eagles clutching hares, serpents looping around the edges of gold plaques. Nothing is still. Every creature twists, bites, leaps. Scholars see in it the reflection of Scythian belief that the universe is built on motion and tension, the chase between life and death that never ends. Even beauty, for them, was kinetic. The Scythians didn't just ride, they ruled by movement. Around the 9th century BCE, they dominated the Pontic steppe, stretching from the Danube to the Caucasus and beyond. Their influence reached Assyria, Persia, even the edges of China. When they attacked, it was like being hit by weather, invisible, sudden, overwhelming. When they traded, they brought amber from the Baltic, silk from the east, and gold from the mountains. To the sedentary empires, they were both nightmare and necessity. In the south, the Persians feared them. In the north, the Greeks mythologized them. To the east, the Chinese recorded them under different names: Saka, Masagete, Isidonis, each a variation on the same steppe song. What the world saw as separate tribes were often branches of one restless lineage. The Scythians themselves may not have thought in terms of empire, but their presence linked half the known world. Herodotus, ever curious, tells us tales that sound half dream, half ethnography, that the Scythians drank the blood of their first enemy killed, that they used the scalps of foes as napkins, that they smoked hemp in tents until their minds soared to the heavens. The details shimmer between exaggeration and truth. Modern excavations confirm at least the hemp. Small bronze bowls filled with burned seeds, clearly used for ritual or relief. Perhaps it was not indulgence, but communion, a way to see beyond the visible. The same historian describes their queen Tomyris, who ruled the Massagetei, possibly a Scythian kin people, and who defeated the Persian king Cyrus the Great. When he fell in battle, she ordered his head submerged in a skin filled with blood, saying, "Drink your fill." History cannot prove it, but the myth captures something essential about steppe pride: the refusal to kneel. Even kings of Persia could vanish like dust before their riders. For all their ferocity, the Scythians were not mindless destroyers. They had a deep sense of ritual and law. Their gods were simple yet profound: the Father Sky, the fire, the sun, and the great Mother Earth. They made sacrifices before battle, not in temples, but under open air, because the sky itself was their sanctuary. To them, the world was sacred because it was alive. Their social order was flexible but respected. Chiefs chosen by lineage and prowess, councils of elders guiding tribes, and warriors sworn to their leaders by oaths sealed with wine and blood. Women, too, held power. Archaeologists have found graves of female warriors buried with armor, bows, and horses. Their bones show arrow wounds, their jewelry rivals that of princes. Greek myths would later remember them as Amazons, but in truth, they were Scythian daughters trained from childhood to ride and fight beside their brothers. Inside their tents, life followed rhythms older than time. Children learned to ride before they could speak clearly. Meals were simple: meat boiled in animal stomachs, bread baked on stones, milk fermented into kumis. Music filled the nights: flutes, drums, chants that rolled across the plains like thunder. Love, marriage, feasting, all were fleeting yet fierce. The Scythian knew that permanence was an illusion. What mattered was intensity. Yet even they were not immune to history's tide. As centuries passed, their power waned. New tribes rose: Sarmatians, Alans, and others, inheriting their art, their bows, their myths. The Scythians faded into legend, absorbed or scattered. The Kurgans became the only witnesses left, standing quietly under the sun, surrounded by whispering grass. Still, every time a steppe wind rises, it feels as though they return. The shimmer of gold dust, the scent of smoke, the faint echo of hooves. They were not forgotten. They became eternal through the very thing they valued most: movement. Even in death, they are still riding. And so, when the next great waves of riders come, the Sarmatians, the Xiongnu, the Huns, they will carry in their blood and breath the legacy of these golden archers, the first true empire of motion and myth. The Scythians taught the world that beauty could ride with terror, that art could live in war, and that gold, like freedom, shines brightest when it moves. The steppe breathes again, colder now, sharper. The horizon stretches the color of steel, and from it rise the stories that even the Greeks could only half believe. Between fact and fable live the women warriors of the north, the Amazons, or perhaps something older, more real, and infinitely more human. They were the daughters of the Scythians, the fierce riders of the steppes, who refused to be only wives and mothers, who made the bow their voice and the horse their freedom. Herodotus, ever the fascinated outsider, wrote that somewhere beyond the Don River lived a tribe of women who hunted and fought like men, who shared no hearth except those they chose. He said they burned off their right breasts to shoot better, that they captured husbands from neighboring tribes, and that their daughters were warriors by birthright. It sounds like myth, yet the earth has begun to whisper confirmation. Across the Kazakh plains and the southern Urals, archaeologists have opened graves that tell a different kind of history, one written not by quill but by bone. In mound after mound, they found the skeletons of women buried with bows, spears, daggers, and horses. Their spines show years of riding. Their ribs bear the scars of battle. Some were young, some middle-aged, a few still teenagers. All were honored like heroes. The Greeks called them Amazons. The steppe may have called them simply people. These warrior women were not outliers. They were part of the fabric. Scythian and Sarmatian society was flexible enough to allow strength where it was found, not just where it was expected. In a world where survival meant mastery of motion, every capable hand mattered. A mother could ride into battle beside her son, and the story would not even need to explain itself. There was no contradiction between nurturing life and defending it with an arrow. The idea of these women haunted Greek imagination. They turned them into myth, fierce queens like Hippolyta and Penthesilea, who fought Heracles and Achilles. To the Greeks, the Amazons were both alluring and terrifying. The inversion of order, the proof that civilization's comfort could be overturned by wind and will. But what they feared was what the steppe understood: freedom unbounded by walls. In the steppe night, under that unblinking sky, a warrior woman could look at the stars and see her ancestors as constellations: the horse, the bow, the eagle. Perhaps she whispered to them before sleep, the way her people always did, asking the wind to carry her spirit far if she fell in battle. Her tent was her castle, her horse, her armor, her children her legacy, whether born from blood or from story. Among the Sarmatians, successors of the Scythians, who thrived between the 5th century BCE and the 4th century CE, such women became even more common. Their graves outnumbered those of male warriors in some regions. They wore scale armor, carried composite bows, and rode mares decorated with silver tack. They fought not as anomalies, but as equals, and when they died, they were buried as such, surrounded by the tools of their craft, their horses adorned, their names perhaps sung for generations. The Sarmatians themselves were enigmatic. To Roman eyes, they were both enemies and mercenaries. They fought for pay, for pride, for the pleasure of movement. Entire contingents served in Roman legions, bringing with them the steppes' curved swords and fearless cavalry tactics. Some scholars even trace the legend of King Arthur's knights to them, descendants of Sarmatian horsemen stationed in Britain during the late Empire. Imagine that, a myth born from another myth, both galloping endlessly across time. But before the Romans, before the legends hardened into story, the Amazons, or rather the women who inspired them, were very real. Their presence transformed what the steppe meant. It wasn't merely a masculine expanse of conquest and herding. It was a shared frontier where men and women both shaped destiny, both read the sky, Both answered the call of motion. There's a strange tenderness in that. Picture a camp at dusk, women returning from a hunt, blood drying on their hands, laughter loud and tired. Children run between the horses, elders tend the fire. The smell of cooked meat mingles with mare's milk and smoke. A young warrior woman sits apart, polishing her bow, humming softly. The sound is low, soothing, repetitive. The melody of a people who have learned that rest, too, is a kind of courage. Greek merchants who ventured north brought back tales of these fierce daughters. They spoke of their tattoos, swirling vines, beasts, spirals, inked in blue or black across arms and thighs. Some said the designs were maps of victories. Others believed they were talismans against fear. Whatever their purpose, they spoke a language of beauty born in danger. Their art carried the same duality. The Sarmatians, inheriting Scythian craftsmanship, began to work in iron and gold. Intricate clasps, belt buckles, and plaques shaped into running animals and intertwined serpents. A golden stag might crouch mid-leap. A lion might bite its own tail. Each piece shimmered with movement frozen in metal, the eternal paradox of steppe life, the wish to make something last, even as everything moves. The Amazons of legend fade eventually into story, but the women of the steppe never truly vanish. When the Huns thunder west, when the Mongols raise banners centuries later, their line continues. Even in modern Central Asia, echoes remain. Women who still ride bareback with effortless grace, who still know the rhythm of the steppe in their bones. History often divides the world into conquerors and conquered, kings and subjects, men and women. The nomads never obeyed such neat categories. Their empire was fluid, their laws oral, their hierarchies seasonal. They measured worth by skill and loyalty, not by birth or gender. It's what made them unpredictable to outsiders and enduring to themselves. And perhaps that's why their memory lingers so vividly. The image of a woman on horseback, hair loose in the wind, bow drawn against the sun. It is as old as the steppe itself. She is not myth, she is motion. The Greeks may have turned her into poetry, but she was already legend before their pens moved. As the stars rise, you can almost hear her ride. The soft clink of bronze, the thud of hooves, fading into infinity. The wind carries her story, unbroken, unburied, still alive beneath the endless sky. By the time the steppe wind reached the stone cities of Persia, it already carried the scent of smoke and horse sweat, the warning of the northern riders. The world was dividing now into two visions of power, the builders and the movers. In the south, the Achaemenid Empire stretched its roads like veins, carving palaces out of stone, engraving its laws in gold and cuneiform. In the north, the horsemen still refused walls. And where those two worlds met, history trembled. The Persians called them the Saka, cousins of the Scythians. To the empire of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, these nomads were both danger and desire, enemies who could annihilate armies, yet allies who could turn deserts into supply routes. The border between Persia and the steppe was not a line. It was a living organism, shifting with the seasons, feeding on trade, tribute, and war. Darius the Great, ambitious beyond geography, tried to tame that horizon. Around 513 BCE, he led his armies northward, crossing the Danube on a pontoon bridge that stunned the world. Behind him marched soldiers from 20 nations, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians. The empire's full orchestra of conquest. They advanced into Scythian territory, expecting a battle, a siege, something concrete. But the steppe offered none of that. The Scythians simply vanished. Every time Darius advanced, the nomads retreated. They burned the grass, poisoned the wells, drove away their herds. The Persians followed deeper into emptiness, their supply lines stretching like nerves. No walls to breach, no cities to capture, only horizon and silence. It was psychological warfare centuries before the term existed. The Scythians knew that patience, not strength, would win. The land itself was their ally. Herodotus tells us that the Scythian king, Iranthursus, sent Darius a message carved in the logic of the steppe. We have no cities and no cultivated land to fear for. We shall not fight you unless we wish it. The arrogance infuriated Darius, but he could do nothing. His men starved under skies too large to control. Eventually, he turned back, defeated not by swords, but by distance. It was the first great lesson the settled empires would learn and forget again and again, that to fight nomads on the steppe is to fight the wind. You cannot hold it. You can only chase it until you tire. But the relationship between Persia and the nomads was not all hostility. Trade was constant. Steppe envoys rode to Persepolis, bringing horses, hides, and slaves, and returned with wine, textiles, and gold. Some Saka became mercenaries in Persian service, their curved bows admired for precision. Achaemenid inscriptions even list them among the empire's peoples. The Saka beyond the sea, the Saka with pointed hats. Darius understood that to rule the world, one must pay homage to its riders. The interaction reshaped both worlds. From Persia, the nomads absorbed craftsmanship. Finer metalwork, textiles dyed with royal purple, a taste for ornamentation. From the steppe, Persia borrowed mobility, couriers on horseback, rapid reconnaissance, the idea that empire required speed as much as ceremony. The Great Royal Road, that artery of communication stretching over 2,500 kilometers, might not have been possible without steppe influence. Its couriers rode as fast as the light, Herodotus marveled, changing horses at every station. An echo of the steppe relay that the Mongols would perfect millennia later. Meanwhile, cultural osmosis worked in subtler ways. Some Saka adopted elements of Zoroastrian belief, the reverence for fire, the dualism of light and darkness. Others influenced Persia's own mythology. The god Mithra, often depicted riding a chariot across the sky, bears uncanny resemblance to steppe solar deities. Religion, like trade, rode freely across the borders that armies could not fix. Imagine the meeting of two worlds. A Persian envoy in embroidered robes, his beard perfumed with cedar oil, standing before a circle of Saka chiefs, whose hair is bound with leather, their eyes sharp, their silence deeper than diplomacy. The air smells of horse sweat and frankincense. Between them lies a gift, a golden bowl etched with leaping stags. They drink together, each trying to read the other's horizon. For a brief moment, empire and emptiness share a cup, but peace is always temporary on the frontier. The Scythians, Saka, and later the Massagetae were not unified. They were constellations of clans, each with its own pride. One tribe might ally with Persia, another raid it. To the settled world, this was chaos. To the steppe, it was balance, fluid, adaptable, alive. The Persians recorded victories and defeats on stone tablets. The steppe recorded them in song. When a great warrior died, his comrades might ride in a wide circle around his grave for days, chanting his deeds until the horse's hooves had drawn a perfect spiral in the grass. That too was memory, a pattern that lasted until wind erased it. In time, both sides learned respect. Persian chroniclers began to describe their nomadic neighbors not only as barbarians, but as children of the sky. Even Alexander the Great, centuries later, when he faced the descendants of these riders in Central Asia, would marvel at their endurance. He fought them for years and never truly conquered them. The ghost of Darius's retreat still rode ahead of him. The Scythians and Persians shared one unspoken truth: that empire, no matter how vast, is fragile against the infinite. One builds walls, the other builds motion. One writes laws in stone, the other in memory. Both, in their own way, serve the sky. At night, the borderlands between Persia and the steppe glowed with twin lights. The steady flame of oil lamps from the empire's watchtowers and the drifting campfires of riders beyond them. Between those two fires lay a silence filled with tension and admiration. The traders who crossed it spoke of strange friendships, Persian governors hosting nomad princes, exchanging horses for gold cups, then fighting the next season. Trust and betrayal rode side by side. Somewhere in that liminal zone, a child might grow up bilingual, learning to quote Persian proverbs and to read the wind like a Saka scout. In his lifetime, he would witness the merging of two worlds, the start of the Great Silk Road, and the slow awakening of something that would outlive both Persia and the Scythians. The idea that the steppe was not a void, but the beating artery of the ancient world. The Persian kings came and went. Their palaces crumbled, but the riders, the eternal riders, remained, their hoofbeats echoing beyond history, carrying messages no empire could intercept. East of the Pamir Mountains, the grasslands stretch into an even vaster horizon, colder, harsher, boundless. Here the sky feels heavier, pressing close to the earth, and the wind sings in a higher pitch, thin as metal. It is a different kind of steppe, one that gave birth not to the Scythians or Sarmatians, but to the Xiongnu, the first great empire of the eastern nomads, and the first to teach China that the Great Wall was not a line but a dare. Long before the word Mongol would echo through history, the Xiongnu roamed these northern plains. Around the 3rd century BCE, while Qin Shi Huang was uniting China under his dragon banner and building his colossal wall, these riders were gathering strength beyond it. Their herds grazed on the cold grass of Mongolia, their camps scattered like stars across the valleys of the Orkhon and Kurlen. They called their supreme ruler Chanyu, a title heavy with both reverence and threat. To the Chinese, they were barbarians, wild, loud, ungovernable. Yet behind the dust of battle, the Xiongnu built something astonishing: a mobile empire with hierarchy, law, diplomacy, and memory. Their capital was not stone, but rhythm, a network of moving camps that followed the seasons. Their armies were as disciplined as any in the world, their communications swift as arrows. In their own way, they were every bit as sophisticated as the sedentary civilizations that feared them. The story begins with a leader whose name still cuts through the steppe air like a cold wind, Modu Chanyu. Around 209 BCE, after a period of clan rivalry, Modu seized power in a coup as brutal as it was brilliant. According to Chinese chronicles, he proved loyalty by commanding his soldiers to shoot his own father, then his wife, and finally his favorite horse. Only those who obeyed survived. The lesson was clear: obedience beyond reason, unity beyond blood. With that, the Xiongnu were born as an empire. Modu transformed chaos into coherence. He united the scattered clans of Mongolia, reorganized them into a confederation that could muster hundreds of thousands of riders. He introduced strict discipline, codified tribute systems, and maintained a council of nobles, the seeds of government in a land of wind. He understood that to rule the steppe, one must move with it. When the newly unified Qin dynasty sent armies north, confident in their numbers and their wall, they found themselves facing not disorganized tribes, but a storm. Modu's cavalry struck like lightning, hitting and vanishing, attacking from flanks, appearing where no road existed. The Great Wall, still raw and untested, did little more than slow them. The Han dynasty, which succeeded the Qin after its swift collapse, inherited both the wall and the problem. Emperor Gaozu, Liu Bang, the founder of Han, tried to confront the Xiongnu directly. In 200 BCE, at Pingcheng, his army was surrounded by Modu's forces. A trap so perfect, it became legend. For 7 days, the emperor himself was pinned by horse archers, his supplies gone, his pride bleeding into the snow. Only through cunning negotiation did he escape. The Empire of China, vast and ancient, had met its equal on horseback. After that, diplomacy replaced arrogance. The Han court began the Hekin policy, peace through kinship, marrying princesses to Xiongnu leaders and sending vast tributes of silk, wine, and grain in exchange for quiet borders. The steppe princes accepted the gifts, smiled, and returned to raiding when the caravan stopped. It was not peace, but rhythm, tribute, truce, betrayal, repeat. Both sides knew the dance. To the Xiongnu, silk was not luxury, but power. They traded it westward to the Saka and the Parthians, long before the term Silk Road existed. They sold Chinese goods to Persians, Persian goods to Chinese, taking profit from both ends of the continent. Their empire became the invisible hand that turned geography into economy. Life in a Xiongnu camp must have been both brutal and beautiful. Imagine it: felt tents pitched along a river valley, smoke curling from hearths made of polished stone, horses grazing beyond, guarded by children who could already shoot from the saddle. Inside, the scent of mutton soup and fermented mare's milk mixes with the dry tang of leather. The women weave, the elders repair bows, and somewhere a singer hums an old song, low, mournful, endless. Outside, snowflakes swirl, sticking to the black fur of horses who stand patient against the storm. The Xiongnu worshipped the eternal heaven. Tengri, the same god of sky and fate their western cousins honored. They made offerings of horses and cattle, sometimes of captives, believing the smoke would rise into the blue dome and draw down favor. They buried their dead with weapons, mirrors, and small golden plaques. The same animal motifs seen among Scythians, proof that the steppe's art traveled farther than any army. The Han emperors, uneasy but impressed, sent envoys to the steppe. The most famous of them, Zhang Qian, captured and later freed, returned to China with news of lands far to the west, Bactria, Parthia, and beyond. His reports opened the imagination of China to the world, and the Silk Road was born. Ironically, it was the Xiongnu who had forced China to look outward, to trade and to explore. Even in resistance, the nomads shaped civilization, But empires of motion burn bright and brief. After Modu's death, the Xiongnu Confederation began to fracture. Factions fought over succession, rival princes allied with Han generals. Climate shifts hardened winters, herds dwindled. By the 1st century CE, their unity cracked. Some fled west, merging with Iranian-speaking tribes. Others stayed and were absorbed into China's northern frontier, their blood mingling with those they once raided. Still, the echoes of their hoofbeats never stopped. The Han chroniclers, with reluctant admiration, wrote that their people follow the grass and water. They have no walled cities, yet they endure. The Great Wall, meant to keep them out, instead became their monument, a reminder to China of what fear built and what freedom inspired. When later empires, the Turks, the Mongols, the Manchus, rose in these same valleys, they carried the Xiongnu's blueprint, the confederation, the postal system, the idea of heaven's mandate for those born in the saddle. The steppe had invented its own form of empire, not of land, but of loyalty, speed, and wind. Tonight, when the cold stars hang above the Gobi and the Orkin rivers glimmer like ghostly silk, you can almost hear Modu's riders again, hooves striking frost, banners snapping like thunder. The wind still moves as they once did, fast, fearless, and impossible to hold. The world, by now, is laced together by movement. From the Black Sea to the Yellow River, the pulse of the steppe carries not only horsemen and raiders, but merchants, monks, and ideas. Trails once trodden by scouts and herds have widened into roads, invisible arteries through which the ancient world breathes. And though no one yet calls it by name, the Silk Road has begun to shimmer into being. The Xiongnu, fractured but not forgotten, have left behind a blueprint: mobility as government, alliance as currency, horizon as home. Their descendants and rivals, the Yuezhi, the Wusun, the Kangju, carry the torch westward, forming new confederations, new names, new myths. And in their wake, something miraculous happens. The nomads begin to trade more than they raid. Imagine a caravan at dawn, not of soldiers but of merchants. Camels, shaggy and solemn, sway under bales of silk, jade, and spices. Horsemen flank them, bows ready but relaxed. The air smells of dust and cinnamon. Somewhere far ahead lies Samarkand. Behind, the walls of Chang'an. Between them stretches a landscape both empty and full: desert, mountain, river, wind. This is not empire in the old sense. This is connection. The Silk Road is not a single route, but a web, spun by necessity and trust. Along it travel silk and gold, glass and grain, but also stories, gods, and germs. And at the heart of it all are the riders. Without them, there is no network, no exchange, no world system. They are the couriers of civilization, the ones who turn distance into dialogue. The nomads understand how to navigate emptiness. They know which wells still hold water after summer, which valleys are safe in winter. They map the unseen, winds, stars, moods of the earth. A merchant who survives 1,000 miles of steppe does so because he listens to them. A Chinese trader learns to read the grass as well as the ledger. A Persian envoy learns to bow to the horizon before he bows to a king. By the 2nd century BCE, the steppe has become both bridge and border. The Han dynasty expands westward under Emperor Wu, hungry for horses. Not just any horses, but the heavenly horses of Fergana, tall and swift, said to sweat blood. The Han sent armies and emissaries across Central Asia to secure them, calling the mission divine. Behind the campaigns lies an unspoken truth. The agricultural empires now depend on the riders they once feared. The Xiongnu, though weakened, still haunt the northern frontier. They raid the caravans that cross their old lands, exacting tribute, demanding respect. Some become protectors for hire, guarding trade routes for payment. Others turn fully to commerce, exchanging furs, amber, and slaves for silk and wine. It is the first great economic entanglement between settled and nomadic worlds. Yet the road also carries faith. Buddhist monks from India travel east, their robes dusty, their scriptures packed in leather cases. They stop in oases ruled by semi-nomadic kings who listen to tales of enlightenment while surrounded by herds. Soon, Buddhist stupas rise beside yurts, and statues of the Buddha take on the calm, high-cheeked faces of steppe craftsmen. The wind begins to carry not only the clatter of hooves, but the hum of prayer wheels. In this way, the Silk Road becomes the bloodstream of a living organism, one that beats in time with both plow and hoof. Traders from Rome wear silk without knowing the weavers. Chinese nobles sip wine without ever meeting the vintners. The steppe links them all, silently. Still, the peace of trade is never pure. Bandits ride the same trails as merchants. A caravan may vanish in sandstorms, swallowed by the Taklamakan Desert, the place from which no one returns. Entire shipments of jade or gold might disappear without a trace, later rediscovered by shepherds centuries later, gleaming in the dunes like mirages. The steppe teaches the same lesson again and again, that wealth travels lightly, and only the story endures. Picture an evening at an oasis midway between civilizations. The sun sinks red into dunes. Traders from China unload silk bolts. Parthians display glassware and perfumes. Nomads barter fine horses for iron tools. Around the fires, languages collide. Sogdian, Bactrian, Tocharian, Chinese, and the untranslatable silence of the gesture. Someone plucks a lute. Someone tells a tale about Alexander the Great. Smoke curls upward, indistinguishable from history itself. What makes the steppe remarkable is not just its speed, but its memory. Even as tribes rise and fall, their patterns remain. When the Xiongnu vanish, the Wusun emerge. When they fade, the Rouran take their place. The names change, but the rhythm endures. Confederation, expansion, trade, decline. It's a biological cycle, as natural as migration. Empires of movement cannot die. They can only transform. The Han chroniclers, observing from afar, begin to understand this. Their records grow less disdainful, more curious. They note the accuracy of nomadic astronomy, the efficiency of their postal systems, the sophistication of their horse breeding. The stereotype of barbarian begins to fracture. The border is no longer civilization versus chaos, but two kinds of intelligence. One that builds vertically, and one that moves horizontally. And still, the mystery deepens. Who were the first to truly see the steppe as a whole? From the Carpathians to the Gobi, not as fragments, but as one connected sea. Perhaps no one ever did. Perhaps only the wind understood it, carrying the scent of Persian wine eastward and the taste of Chinese salt westward. By the turn of the first millennium, BCE to CE, the Silk Road has become an idea as much as a path, a belief that the world can be crossed, that everything distant can touch. Its greatest architects remain nameless: guides, translators, women tending camels, scouts who vanished in snow. For every emperor who claims it, 1,000 riders actually lived it. Some nights, those riders would stop on a ridge, watch the stars, and feel the vastness pressing down. The earth beneath them held no borders, no lines of empire, just the familiar hum of wind and the slow heartbeat of their horses. They might not have known it, but they were building the first global network. One woven not of wires or roads, but of trust, motion, and memory. The Silk Road Riders were not kings. They were the quiet architects of connection, people who lived and died in transit, so that ideas could travel farther than bodies ever could. They taught the world that even in emptiness there is direction, and that the sound of a hoofbeat can echo from one end of civilization to the other. As centuries unspool, the steppe does what it always does. It transforms without warning. The Scythians and Saka dissolve into memory. The Xiongnu fade into whispers. The Silk Road Riders weave new constellations of tribes. And out of those constellations, a new power begins to stir in the Western plains, where Europe meets Asia. Their name will slide across history like smoke. The Sarmatians. They are not strangers to the world the Scythians built. They are, in a sense, their younger kin, inheritors of gold, horse, and horizon. Around the 5th century BCE, they begin to move westward from the Ural Mountains, a tide of riders following the same eternal instinct. Better grass, richer herds, new lands. They speak a language close to the Scythian tongue, rich in Iranian roots. Their horses are smaller but tireless, their bows stronger, their armor more intricate. If the Scythians were the artists of the steppe, the Sarmatians are its engineers. To the sedentary empires, Persia, Greece, Rome, they look like reincarnations of an older nightmare. But the Sarmatians are different. They have learned from centuries of contact with civilization. They trade more, they raid less. They weave silk into their saddles, carry Roman glass beside nomad daggers. And though they still bury their dead in kurgans, those mounds are now filled not only with gold and weapons, but mirrors, combs, and carved ivory, proof of a people who understand beauty as deeply as war. When Greek traders first meet them on the shores of the Black Sea, they record a mixture of awe and confusion. They ride as if born to the horse, one says. They live without cities, yet they have law. Others note the presence of women warriors, echoes of the Amazons still alive in Sarmatian blood. Indeed, archaeology confirms it. Graves near the Don and Volga rivers reveal female skeletons with iron-tipped arrows, long swords, and armor. One woman, buried beside a horse, still grips a bronze mirror in one hand, a spear in the other. The balance is almost poetic. Their armor marks a turning point. Scythian leather and fur give way to metal. Small overlapping scales of bronze or iron stitched onto leather vests, forming flexible protection that gleams in sunlight like fish skin. They cover their horses too, turning both rider and mount into one glimmering being, half human, half machine. Later, Romans would copy this style, calling it cataphract, the armored cavalry that became the terror of antiquity. The first prototype of a knight was not born in Europe but in the endless grass of the steppe. The Sarmatians ruled by charisma, not crown. Clans gathered around powerful chieftains, whose authority came from bravery, generosity, and the ability to keep alliances. They called these leaders kings, but the word meant less monarchy and more magnetism. A good chief could unite hundreds of camps. A bad one could lose them overnight. Loyalty flowed like rivers, joining and parting according to need. It was democracy at the speed of horses. Their religion, like their politics, moved with the wind. They revered fire, the sun, and ancestral spirits that rode with them in storms. They carved animal figures on jewelry and saddles: stags, eagles, tigers, each a guardian or omen. At night, fires dotted the plains like constellations fallen to earth. Priests, both men and women, cast offerings of fat into the flames, chanting for luck before a raid or journey. Even now, travelers in Kazakhstan can find ancient altars buried beneath dunes, stones blackened by centuries of ritual smoke. As Rome expanded eastward, it collided with Sarmatian power. The encounter was not immediate conquest, but negotiation. An exchange of horses for gold, mercenaries for treaties. Some Sarmatian contingents fought for Rome, their cavalry feared from Gaul to Britain. Others raided Roman provinces, testing their fortifications like wolves circling a camp. The Romans, unused to fighting on open plains, learned quickly that the steppe bow could reach farther than their legions expected. By the 1st century CE, the Sarmatians controlled much of the territory once held by the Scythians. The Pontic steppe, the Caspian coast, parts of the Carpathians. They became both bridge and barrier between Rome and the east. Their trade routes linked the Danube to the Volga, their caravans carrying slaves, furs, and silk between worlds. Though they had no written language of their own, their presence is recorded everywhere. In Greek inscriptions, Roman dispatches, Persian rumors. The literate world could not stop writing about the illiterate one. They were not invincible. Internal divisions, droughts, and pressure from new nomads, Alans, Goths, and Huns, began to erode their unity. Yet the Sarmatians adapted, as nomads always do. They blended, merged, survived. Some migrated into Roman territory, settling as foederati, allies bound by oath. Others joined the Alans, and later the early Slavs, leaving linguistic footprints across Eastern Europe. Their name, Sarmatia, lingered for centuries, as a poetic term for the wild lands beyond the empire. But their spirit, that blend of artistry, ferocity, and endurance, lived on. When medieval chroniclers later described knights as noble riders clad in shining mail, they unknowingly echoed the Sarmatian ideal. The notion that honor rides with armor, that the warrior's grace is as sacred as his strength. That begins here, on the cold steppe, under the endless blue. There's an image I can't help returning to. A Sarmatian warrior at sunset, his horse's armor glinting bronze, his own helmet crowned with feathers. He sits alone on a ridge, watching smoke rise from distant fires. Some his own, some his enemies. The wind carries the smell of grass and iron. He does not dream of empire or conquest, only of continuity, of his son inheriting his saddle, his daughter his courage, his people their movement. When darkness falls, he rides down toward his camp. Behind him, the horizon swallows the light. Ahead, the fires glow warm, their shapes flickering like stars fallen to earth. The Sarmatians did not leave monuments, but they left a mood, a kind of metallic twilight that still clings to the imagination of Europe. Their reign will fade, as all steppe empires do, but their echo endures, in armor, in legend, in the strange familiarity of every rider who looks west at dusk and feels the horizon looking back. The Scythians dreamed of freedom. The Sarmatians built its armor. And beyond them, the earth already stirs again with new hooves. the distant thunder of a storm called the Huns. The wind changes again. It carries a sound deeper and darker, a gathering hum that feels like the sky holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the Caspian and the Altai, in the foggy cradle of Central Asia, new riders are being born. No empire knows their name yet, but soon every border will whisper it in fear. They are the Huns, the last storm of the ancient steppe, the riders who will turn Europe's imagination inside out. Even now, their origins blur into myth. The chroniclers of China call them Xiongnu's lost sons, splinter tribes who fled west after defeat. Others say they were forged from many peoples, Turks, Uralic tribes, Saka remnants, fused by hardship into something fierce and fluid. They appear in records like a mirage. No one sees them coming, and when they do, it's already too late. By the 4th century CE, the Roman world is weary. The empire that once called itself eternal has split east and west, its armies thin, its provinces restless. And into that slow decay rides the wind from the east, cold, unstoppable. The Huns come not as traders or migrants, but as motion incarnate. Their arrival changes the map of the world in a single generation. Contemporary writers could scarcely describe what they saw. Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman historian hardened by battle, called them beyond human. Faces weathered like leather, eyes piercing as hawks, their bodies molded by the saddle. He said they ate raw meat, slept on horseback, and lived without fire or roof. Yet beneath that fear lies fascination, the awe of watching nature unbound, civilization confronted by its mirror image. The Huns' tactics were terror itself. They moved in silence, emerging from fog or forest at dawn. Their horses were small but tireless, their bows compact and deadly. They struck fast, scattered before counterattack, then circled back with precision. Against legions trained for rigid formation, the Huns were fluid as smoke. An army could march days toward them and never find a single camp, only hoofprints and burned villages. Their language, lost to time, may have sounded like thunder rolling across plains. They used short commands, whistles, and gestures more than words. Their communication was instinctual, honed by generations of riding as one organism. Each rider carried spare bows, quivers of composite arrows, lassos for capturing enemies, and sometimes small bronze mirrors for reflecting sunlight into the eyes of opponents. Simple tools turned into weapons of chaos. As they moved westward, the dominoes began to fall. The Alans and Sarmatians broke before them. The Goths fled into Roman lands, begging for asylum. That flight, refugees pouring over the Danube, would set off the chain of events that historians later called the Great Migration. But to the Huns, it was simply movement, the old rhythm of the steppe expanding into new pastures. By the late 4th century, the Huns had reached the plains of Hungary, the great Carpathian Basin. From there they struck outward in every direction, raiding Pannonia, Thrace, and the Balkans. Cities that had stood for centuries fell in weeks. Yet paradoxically, they built order out of their own chaos. Under a succession of warlords, first Balamba, then Rugila, and finally Attila, the Huns created a confederation that stretched from the Volga to the Rhine. It was less an empire than a storm-given structure, held together by charisma and fear. Attila, the name itself means little father, rose in the 430s, and with him the legend crystallized. To his followers, he was chosen by heaven. To his enemies, He was the scourge of God. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes set to flash like iron in firelight, Attila ruled through both cruelty and charm. He could be generous to allies, ruthless to traitors, patient in diplomacy. When he rode into battle, his horse wore no ornament, his sword plain. A statement that power needed no decoration. Rome and Constantinople both sent envoys to his court, bringing gifts of gold, silk, and concubines. They found not barbaric chaos, but unsettling order. Disciplined camps, ambassadors treated with protocol, treaties honored when convenient. Attila's tent, they said, was built of fine wood, its furnishings simple but purposeful. In its center hung the legendary sword of Mars, or so the Huns believed, a blade found by a shepherd and delivered to the king as a divine omen. He carried it into every campaign, convinced it was heaven's gift of conquest. The Huns' diplomacy was as cunning as their warfare. They alternated between demanding tribute and offering alliance, keeping both Eastern and Western Rome perpetually guessing. One day, they might serve as mercenaries, crushing rebellious tribes for gold. The next, they would turn on their employers. The empire could neither trust nor exterminate them. Their society, for all its ferocity, was complex. The Huns adopted customs from every people they conquered: Gothic metalwork, Roman jewelry, Persian fabrics. Their leaders drank wine from Byzantine goblets and rode under banners embroidered with silk. The steppe, once again, absorbed civilization and returned it transformed. But at its core, their culture still pulsed with the simplicity of motion. They carried no idols. Their gods lived in sky, storm, and sword. Their justice was swift, theft punished by death, cowardice by exile. Yet they prized loyalty above all. The bond between warrior and leader was sacred, sealed not by contract, but by shared blood and battle. Their greatest weapon, though, was psychological. Entire provinces surrendered at the mere rumor of their approach. Villages emptied, crops burned, cities locked their gates. To resist the Huns was to fight inevitability itself. The fear they inspired was half the victory. By 447, Attila's riders had reached the walls of Constantinople, those massive fortifications glinting in the sun. They could not breach them, but they left devastation in their wake. 2 years later, they turned west. In 451, on the plains of Gaul, Attila met his match at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields, a clash so immense that later poets said the earth itself trembled. The Roman general Aetius, aided by Visigothic allies, finally halted the tide. For the first time, the wind hesitated. Attila retreated, but not defeated. He turned instead toward Italy, laying waste to Aquileia, whose ruins smoldered for generations. Legend claims that when he approached Rome itself, Pope Leo I met him at the gates. No one knows what words passed between them. But the next day, Attila withdrew. Some said he saw angels guarding the city, others that he was already dying. Within a year, he was gone, dead in his tent on his wedding night, drowned in his own blood from a nosebleed. The empire of the Huns died with him, scattering like ashes on the steppe wind. And yet, they left a scar on the imagination of Europe that never healed. Medieval chroniclers would turn them into demons, later poets into symbols of fate. But beneath the legend lies the same truth that has followed us since the first rider: that power born from motion cannot last, but it can transform everything it touches. Even now, if you listen to the wind in the Hungarian plains, you can almost hear their ghosts. a faint rhythm of hooves, fading westward, forever chasing a horizon they could never reach, forever teaching the world that walls are temporary, but movement is eternal. The echo of hooves fades, but only for a moment. History exhales, and the dust that the Huns left behind begins to settle into legend. Yet legend never truly rests. For even as Attila's empire dissolves into scattered tribes and forgotten camps, the dream of dominion through movement lingers in the blood of the steppe. The world still trembles at the thought of riders appearing from the horizon. When Attila's body was carried to its secret grave, tradition says he was buried in triple coffins of iron, silver, and gold. And the slaves who dug the pit were executed so no one could reveal its location. Whether myth or truth, the image fits. The Huns vanishing back into the earth that made them, their gold hidden beneath grass, their name echoing like thunder long after the storm is gone. But what happens after thunder? The air remains charged. The lands once ruled by Attila, the Hungarian plains, the Carpathians, the Volga steppe, fill with new wanderers. Former vassals of the Huns, Goths, Gepids, Bulgars, Avars rise in the vacuum. Some try to imitate the Huns' power, others flee their shadow. The pattern of the steppe resumes: collapse, renewal, expansion. For the settled empires of Europe and Asia, it feels like living next to a restless ocean. You cannot conquer the sea. You can only build breakwaters and hope they hold. So they build walls, forts, alliances. But the steppe remains patient. It waits, watching from the edge of civilization, its people rebuilding in silence. The immediate heirs to the Hunnic spirit were many and none. The Avars, emerging in the 6th century, claimed descent from the Huns and adopted their tactics. They swept westward into Central Europe, creating another confederation centered in the same fertile basin of Pannonia. To the Byzantines, who faced them across the Danube, they seemed like Attila reborn. They demanded tribute, raided at will, and surrounded themselves with subject peoples, Slavs, Gepids, remnants of steppe tribes. Their capital, an ever-moving camp, was said to glitter with gold and slaves. The Byzantine historian Menander Protector described them as tall, proud, and cruel, their armor gleaming like the sun. But behind that armor lay bureaucracy, an imperial mind hidden in a nomadic body. The Avars understood taxation, diplomacy, even engineering. They adopted Roman siege engines, Persian artisans, and Slavic farmers, weaving them into a single mobile society. When they besieged Constantinople in 626, their catapults hurled stones the size of men, their cavalry thundered across the Thracian plains, and the empire nearly collapsed. Only a combination of luck, plague, and divine wind saved the city. But the Avars, like all who ruled before, could not escape entropy. Power on the steppe depends on unity, and unity is fragile. The same mobility that gives life also makes rebellion easy. A clan displeased with its leader can simply ride away. By the 8th century, the Avars fractured under pressure from the rising Slavs and a new power stirring further east. The Gukturks, the Blue Sky Turks, heirs of an even older wind. Still, the legacy of the Huns remained in subtler ways. In Europe's collective memory, Hun became a word that meant terror, chaos, otherness. Mothers whispered it to frighten children. Chroniclers invoked it whenever new riders appeared. Even 1,000 years later, during the World Wars, the word would still surface, a ghost in the Western imagination. Yet if we strip away the fear, what remains is awe. the recognition of a people who mastered impermanence, who made movement their empire. The Huns' disappearance did not erase their influence. It scattered it like pollen. Their composite bows, small and recurved, became the model for every Central Asian weapon to come. Their stirrup, once a simple loop of leather, evolved into metal and changed warfare forever, allowing riders to shoot or strike with balance and precision. The concept of cavalry as shock weapon, as the decisive arm of battle, begins with them, but perhaps their greatest contribution was psychological. They taught both East and West to imagine the steppe as something mythic, a living frontier between order and chaos, heaven and earth. The Great Wall, the limes, the fortresses on the Danube, all were monuments to fear of the rider. And yet, paradoxically, it was through those same frontiers that culture flowed. The Huns, for all their destruction, had connected worlds that had forgotten each other. When we read of them now, it's tempting to see only violence, fire, blood, empire collapsing. But look closer, and you'll find moments of grace. Alliances formed between unlikely peoples, technologies shared, even art exchanged. Archaeologists have found Hunnic jewelry that mixes Roman goldwork with steppe motifs, brooches shaped like horses' heads, inlaid with garnet from India. They were destroyers, yes, but also conduits of creation. As their tribes dissolved into new identities, they carried those hybrid elements outward. The Bulgars moved into the Balkans, founding kingdoms that blended Turkic and Slavic roots. The Magyars, descendants perhaps of Hunnic auxiliaries mixed with Ugric peoples, would later settle the same plains and name their new homeland Hungary in echo of Hunnic. Even centuries later, Hungarian kings would proudly call themselves descendants of Attila, turning myth into heritage. It's strange, isn't it? How disappearance can be another form of endurance. The Huns vanished as a nation, but survived as legend. And legend lasts longer than law. Their empire burned out in a generation, yet the shockwaves of their motion still ripple through Europe's languages, art, and memory. Picture the steppe again, emptied of riders but not of meaning. The grass grows over old graves. The wind sighs through abandoned mounds. Somewhere beneath, a sword rusts, perhaps Attila's, perhaps no one's. A bird lands on the mound, silent, unafraid. The world seems peaceful, but it is only resting, because the steppe never sleeps. The rhythm of hooves will rise again. New names, new banners, new faiths. The ghosts of the Huns, if they watch, must smile. They know what the empires do not. That eternity belongs not to those who build walls, but to those who know how to ride around them. The silence after the storm feels endless. For a moment, the grasslands seem to breathe easier. The fires of the Huns and Avars fade to memory, their weapons swallowed by the soil, their banners long since turned to ash. The world, it seems, has exhaled. But the steppe is patient, and patience on the steppe is never empty. It is incubation. Beneath the calm, another heartbeat is gathering. When the Huns vanished from history's stage, they didn't leave an empty theater. They left a framework, a pattern of leadership, language, and movement that would echo in the centuries to come. The steppe peoples learned from it, absorbed it like rain into earth. Out of that soil would grow a succession of powers, Turkic, Mongolic, and Ugric, pagan, Buddhist, and Islamic. Each new generation looked back at the horizon and thought, there, that is where freedom lives. But before the next empire could rise, the world needed time to reorganize itself. The 6th and 7th centuries became a kind of interlude, a quieter time, at least in the West, where empires licked their wounds. Rome, now Byzantine, focused on survival. Persia faced new threats from Arabia. In the east, however, on the open grasslands of Mongolia and the Altai, fires were burning again. Small, scattered, invisible from afar, but destined to merge into something vast. This pause in the steppes' thunder was deceptive. Even in stillness, there was motion. The old trade routes continued to hum. The Silk Road, once protected by Han and Parthian diplomacy, was now a more dangerous, fragmented artery, but still alive. Merchants from Sogdiana, the master traders of Central Asia, became its lifeblood. They rode through danger, carrying not only goods, but gossip. News of crumbling kingdoms, of new tribes forming alliances, of prophets preaching unity under the sky. One of those news streams spoke of the rise of Islam in the far southwest. In the deserts of Arabia, a different kind of nomad, the Bedouin, had turned faith into force, and within a century, they would build an empire that touched the same horizons as the steppe. But before those worlds collided, the steppe had one more ancient chapter to write, a reflection on itself. Across Mongolia, remnants of the Xiongnu and new Turkic-speaking clans began to coalesce. They called their gods by the old name Tengri, the eternal blue sky. They worshipped mountains as sacred ancestors, believed the wolf to be their father, and saw in every gust of wind a message from beyond. The wolf was not metaphor. It was origin myth. According to legend, a child left for dead on the battlefield was nursed by a she-wolf who gave rise to the Turkic peoples. In their language, that wolf was Asina. Her descendants would one day rule half the earth. But for now, the steppe remained a mosaic of small khanates and tribal unions. The Ruran Khaganat, heirs of Xiongnu order. The Dieli Confederation, restless and rising. The early Turks, still apprentices in empire. The Ruran ruled first, building a nomadic state that stretched across the Mongolian plateau, exacting tribute from northern China and trading silk for horses. Their Khagans were proud, but their power was brittle, overextended, underguarded, and dependent on loyalty that could vanish overnight. Among the Ruran's vassals were ironworkers, tribes who lived near the Altai Mountains, skilled in forging weapons and tools for their overlords. They called themselves the Turuk. Their leader, a man named Bumin, began as a servant in name but a sovereign in waiting. He watched the Ruran grow decadent, divided, forgetful of the old steppe virtues. And when the time came, he moved as the steppe always does, swiftly, silently, decisively. In 552 CE, Bumin rose in revolt. The Ruran armies, expecting loyalty, met annihilation. Within months, the old order was gone. The Turks, once blacksmiths, became kings. They forged not just iron, but empire. Under Bumin and his brother Istami, the steppe united again from the borders of China to the Caspian Sea. It was an empire without walls, but with structure. Dual rule, east and west, joined by blood and by the idea of heaven's mandate. They called themselves the Gökturks, people of the blue sky. The echoes of Modu Chanyu's Xiongnu could be heard in every decree. The same belief that sovereignty came from Tengri, not from men, but that rise belongs to another section. For now, we remain at the hinge, the quiet threshold where history holds its breath between destruction and renewal. In the ruins of old Hunnic camps, wildflowers grow. The bones of horses bleach white against the soil. A Roman traveler passing through might see nothing but grass and wind, never realizing he is standing on the dormant lungs of history. Yet if he listens closely, he might hear a sound too deep for language, the faint beat of hooves, still there beneath the silence. Those who live on the steppe never call it empty. To them, stillness is only preparation. The sky, after all, does not need to shout to remind you of its size, and so the steppe rests. But it does not sleep. Clouds roll low, shadows move like ghosts, and somewhere in a mountain valley, a smith's hammer strikes iron for the first time in a new age. Sparks leap into the air, tiny suns born of fire and breath. They rise, they vanish, they drift with the wind toward the next empire, waiting to ignite. The air over the Altai is thinner, sharper. It tastes like iron and snow. Beneath the jagged ridges, smoke coils from hidden forges, where men beat molten ore into weapons and whispers into legend. This is where the world turns again, where the silence left by the Huns and Avars is broken by the rhythmic clang of hammers. In those echoes, the sky people are reborn. The Gökturks, the children of the eternal blue. Their story begins, as all steppe stories do, with fire and rebellion. The Ruran Khaganate, weary with power and intoxicated by its own wealth, had ruled these plains for nearly a century. They grew soft, tangled in intrigue, demanding tribute from the smithing clans of the Altai. Among those clans were the Ashina, descendants, so they claimed, of a grey she-wolf. They forged weapons for their masters, but forged something else in secret. Unity. In the year 552, their leader Bumin Ashina sent word to the Ruran Khan, a request to marry his daughter, a symbolic gesture of equality. The Ruran laughed. How could a slave ask for royal blood? The insult became prophecy. Within months, Bumin rallied his people and struck. The Ruran armies, caught unprepared, shattered like glass in a sandstorm. When the smoke cleared, the smith had become Kagan, and the steppe had a new name for empire, Turuk, meaning strong, pure, enduring. The Göktürk Empire rose fast. Its banners, blue silk embroidered with wolves, fluttered across the horizon from Manchuria to the Caspian. Bumin ruled the eastern half, his brother Istemi the west. It was a structure both familiar and revolutionary, twin thrones under one sky, echoing the duality of the steppe. Sunrise and sunset, mountain and plain, blade and breath. Together, they forged an empire of motion, balanced by hierarchy, discipline tempered by wind. To the Chinese chroniclers of the Northern Wei and Sui dynasties, the Turks seemed a paradox. Disciplined yet free, savage yet sophisticated. Their rulers wore silk robes over iron armor. Their tents were adorned with silver cups and scrolls written by captive scribes. They understood diplomacy as well as war, sending embassies to China, Persia, and Byzantium, weaving themselves into the very web of world politics. Istemi, ruling from the western plains, became a master of alliance. He saw the value of the Silk Road not as a road, but as leverage. When the Sassanid Persians tried to monopolize trade, Istemi turned instead to the Byzantines. In 568 CE, his envoys arrived in Constantinople, the first Turkic embassy to Europe. They came bearing silk, horses, and the message that the steppe now had diplomats as well as warriors. Emperor Justin II received them with ceremony, realizing that the winds of Central Asia had become the arteries of global commerce. The Gokturks weren't conquerors in the Roman sense. They didn't occupy and garrison. They ruled by network. Their empire stretched through loyalty, tribute, and the invisible ties of trust and fear. Tribes joined their confederation willingly, drawn by protection and prestige. The Turks offered a simple promise. Loyalty to the Khagan would bring wealth. Rebellion would bring obliteration. But their true religion was not conquest. It was balance. They worshipped Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and Umai, the mother goddess who guarded fertility and children. Their priests read omens in the flight of eagles and the curl of smoke. When a Khagan died, his people held a ewe, a funeral rite where warriors circled his burial mound 9 times on horseback, chanting of his deeds, their tears mingling with rain. They believed that the Khagan spirit rose to Tengri, joining the ancestors who rode among the clouds. If the Scythians gave the steppe its art and the Huns its terror, the Gokturks gave it memory. For the first time, the steppe wrote its own story. In the Orkhon Valley of Mongolia, on cliffs overlooking the river, they carved runes, vertical lines of strange elegance, into stone. These inscriptions, known today as the Orkhon monuments, are the oldest written records of any Turkic language. They speak not as conquerors, but as philosophers. I have not let my people go hungry or naked, one inscription proclaims. I ruled by the laws of heaven. My people, remember this. Another reads, the foolish people, not knowing heaven's decree, were deceived by lies. They perished. The voice is both paternal and mournful, the sky speaking through stone. The runes remind us that even in an age of war, the steppe valued wisdom. The Gokturks' power lay in connection. From their capital in Utuken, sacred forest, heart of the world, messages traveled hundreds of miles in days. Riders carried news, tribute, and song between the farthest tribes. Every tent was a potential throne, every horizon a border that could be redrawn overnight. Yet their strength, like that of every empire born of motion, carried the seed of impermanence. After Buman's death, his successors quarreled. The empire split into east and west. Both halves flourished, then faltered. The Tang dynasty of China played them against each other, offering alliances and betrayals with equal grace. For a while, the Turks became vassals. Then they rose again free. History in the steppe is circular, not linear. Rebellion always waiting beneath loyalty, sunrise always following sunset. The Gokturks ruled for nearly 2 centuries, their influence spreading far beyond their borders. They gave birth to new Turkic states, the Khazars, the Uyghurs, the Bulgars, each carrying fragments of their heritage. They shaped languages, trade routes, even the rhythms of diplomacy between East and West. And though their empire eventually fractured, their idea that the sky grants sovereignty to those who move in harmony with it endured. Imagine standing at dusk beside one of their stone monuments in the Orkhon Valley. The wind sighs through the grass, the river murmurs below, and the runes seem to glow faintly in the fading light. The words carved there are almost lullabies now, reminders that everything passes, that even empires of wind leave shadows. You can almost hear the Khagan's voice in the rustle of the grass. Do not forget, the sky is eternal, the earth is vast, and the human heart, if guided by honor, can ride between them without fear. Morning light spreads pale and golden over the Orkhon Valley, catching the frost that clings to the grass. The blue sky stretches endless and clean, the same sky that the Gökturks once worshipped. Their runes, weathered and patient, still gleam faintly when the sun strikes them. Yet time, relentless as wind, moves forward. The empire of the Blue Turks fractures, but the idea they carried, that heaven grants dominion to those who understand the rhythm of the steppe, refuses to die. Out of their shadow rise new tribes, new faiths, new songs. Among them, the Uyghurs. They emerge quietly, as many steppe powers do, first as vassals, then as heirs. Descendants of the Delay Confederation, kin to the Turks by language and custom, the Uyghurs build upon the ruins of their predecessors with something startlingly different. They choose the pen as well as the bow. Around the middle of the 8th century, under their leader Kutluk Bilgekul, they overthrow the Second Turkic Khaganate and claim the sacred heartland of Otuken. The eternal blue sky, they say, has smiled on them now. Unlike the Gökturks, who ruled by the will of heaven alone, the Uyghurs build a more settled order. Their capital, Ordubalik, city of the court, rises from the steppe like a mirage, walls of baked brick, markets filled with silk and grain, temples that smell of incense and parchment. It is a city of movement made still, a compromise between the winds of the plain and the calm of civilization. Traders from China and Sogdiana marvel at its orderliness, its libraries, its stables filled with swift, shining horses. Their Khagans are warriors, yes, but also patrons of art and faith. In 762 CE, one of them, Bogu Khan, encounters a group of Sogdian merchants who bring not just goods, but belief, Manichaeism, the dualist religion of light and darkness, born in Persia. To the Uyghurs, the faith feels familiar, a cosmic balance, heaven and earth, sun and moon, good and evil. Bogu Khan converts, and soon his empire glows with a strange new light. Murals painted in vivid reds and blues, scrolls of delicate script, hymns sung in Persian and Turkic alike. This is a turning point in the long history of the steppe. For the first time, a nomadic empire embraces religion not as politics but as philosophy. The Uyghurs become protectors of artists and monks, their camps filled with scribes copying texts in several languages. The same hands that once drew bows now paint bodhisattvas and Manichaean deities, their faces serene under the shifting tent light. They are also canny diplomats. The Tang dynasty, weakened by rebellion, needs allies. The Uyghurs ride to their aid in 757, helping crush the An Lushan revolt that nearly destroyed China. In return, the Tang emperors shower them with gifts, silk, princesses, titles. The Uyghur Khagans understand the dance of empire. Sometimes you conquer with swords, sometimes with silk. Their language, written in a vertical script, borrowed from Sogdian, becomes the bridge between East and West. Merchants along the Silk Road speak it. Monks copy sutras in it. Diplomats write treaties with it. For centuries afterward, Uyghur script will serve as the ancestor of the Mongolian alphabet. Proof that words, like horses, can travel farther than their masters. Yet prosperity breeds fragility. The Uyghurs, like the Gökturks before them, grow rich and divided. In the 9th century, drought strikes the Mongolian steppe. Grain withers, herds die. When the Kyrgyz tribes rise against them, the Uyghur Empire collapses almost overnight. Ordu Balik burns, its libraries turned to ash. Survivors flee. West to the Tarim Basin, south toward China, carrying their scriptures and their stories in wagons. But the Uyghurs do not vanish. They adapt again, becoming the masters of oasis kingdoms, Turfan, Kucha, and Gaochang, places where desert and mountain meet. There, they reinvent themselves as merchants, scribes, and translators. They convert from Manichaeism to Buddhism, then later to Nestorian Christianity, and finally, in time, to Islam. Theirs is a spiritual evolution written across centuries, each belief absorbed and reinterpreted under the same vast sky. If you travel the desert today, you can still find their traces. Painted caves at Bezeklik, filled with celestial figures, their faces soft and luminous. In those murals, one can almost hear the murmur of the old steppe. Horses outside, wind against silk, the faint hum of a scribe reciting prayers to the rhythm of breath. What the Uyghurs teach the world is subtle but profound. That nomadism is not the absence of culture, but its movement. Every empire before them sought permanence. They found wisdom in impermanence. Their capital may fall, but their language lives on. Their gods may change, but their art endures. Like the wind, they leave fingerprints without needing to stay. To the Chinese chroniclers, they seemed civilized. To later Turks, decadent. To modern historians, transitional. But to the steppe itself, they were simply one more verse in the long song of motion. The Uyghur Khagans replaced the roar of conquest with the whisper of ink. Yet they were no less children of Tengri. At night, perhaps, a Uyghur monk in Turfan would step outside his temple and look up at the same blue-black sky his ancestors worshipped. He would see the Great Bear turning slowly, the Milky Way stretching like a silver road, the eternal caravan of souls. And he might think, we have not lost the steppe, we have only learned to paint it. In their quiet endurance, the Uyghurs bridged the world between the warrior past and the written future. Their fall marks not the end of nomadic empire, but the soft inhalation before the next great exhale, when the thunder of hooves will rise again, louder than ever, carrying the last and greatest riders of them all. Far to the west, beyond the Caspian's grey shimmer and the Caucasus's teeth, another people gathers its courage in the wind. They are neither fully nomad nor fully settler. They live in tents, but dream in stone, trade in silk, yet pray in secret tongues. Between the forests of the Volga and the shores of the Black Sea, they build a frontier kingdom that endures where others only pass. They are the Khazars, riders, merchants, converts, and perhaps the strangest heirs of the steppe. Their beginning is quiet, born out of the collapse of the Gokturk world. When that empire broke apart in the 7th century, fragments of its western tribes drifted toward the lower Volga. There, among Sarmatian ruins and Alan fortresses, they found a crossroads. Rivers that bled into seas, caravans that linked Persia to the Baltic. It was a place made for traders and diplomats, for those who could speak many languages and shift loyalties with the seasons. Out of this intersection, the Khazar Khaganate emerged, part fortress, part marketplace, part mirage. The Khazars were Turkic in speech, but cosmopolitan in spirit. Their Khagans ruled from Atil, a twin city stretched along both banks of the Volga. The northern half was wooden, full of yurts and corrals. The southern half was stone, its streets humming with merchants from every compass point. Byzantine chroniclers compared it to Constantinople in miniature. Markets of furs, amber, slaves, and honey. Wharves stacked with barrels of salt fish and bales of silk. Minarets, churches, and temples standing uneasily side by side. The genius of the Khazars lay not in conquest, but in neutrality. They stood between two superpowers, the Christian Byzantines to the west and the Muslim Caliphate to the south, and balanced them with remarkable finesse. When Arab generals tried to push north through the Caucasus in the 7th century, the Khazars met them with fire and cunning. For nearly a century, the steppe blazed with their resistance. At times they allied with Byzantium, at times with Baghdad, never surrendering to either. Their army, disciplined and multinational, could field cavalry in lamella armor and light horse archers swift as thought. The rivers of the steppe ran red more than once, but the line held. By the mid-8th century, peace and prosperity returned, and with it came a decision that would astonish the world. Surrounded by empires demanding conversion, the sword of Islam from the south, the cross of Byzantium from the west, the Khazars chose a third path. Their ruling elite adopted Judaism. No chronicler can quite explain why. Perhaps it was political, a way to remain independent, perhaps genuine faith, perhaps both. The story survives in legend, envoys from the three great religions appearing at the Khagan's court, each arguing for truth, and the Khagan replying, "You have all spoken wisely, yet I will follow the God of Abraham, who needs neither empire nor conquest." Whatever its cause, the choice made the Khazar realm unique, the only Jewish-ruled empire in medieval Eurasia. Synagogues rose beside mosques and churches. Hebrew scribes worked alongside Greek and Arabic translators. The steppe, once feared for barbarism, became a classroom of tolerance. Merchants along the Volga traded under Khazar protection, and travelers from Spain to Persia wrote of Atil as a city of peace, where one could hear 7 languages before breakfast. Their economy thrived on diversity. Silver dirhams from Baghdad mingled with Viking hack silver from the Baltic. Khazar customs officers taxed the caravans that passed between east and west, taking their profit not from plunder, but from percentages. Their coinage bore no images, only runic and Hebrew characters, a signature of modesty and mystery. Atil glittered at night, its lamps reflecting on the river like stars fallen to earth. And yet, even in this seeming harmony, the old restlessness remained. The Khazars were still people of the horse. Their nobles kept herds on the steppe, rode to war with composite bows, and held feasts where mead and poetry flowed together. They believed, like their ancestors, that the sky itself was alive. Only now they gave it a new name. The Torah and the wind shared the same sacred hush. Their neighbors watched with fascination and suspicion. The Byzantines praised their diplomacy, but feared their neutrality. The Abbasids admired their wealth, but hated their defiance. To the emerging Rus' princes of the north, Norse adventurers turned Slavic kings. The Khazars were both mentors and rivals. For a time, the Rus' paid tribute in furs and slaves. Later, they grew strong enough to challenge their former patrons. The end came not with apocalypse, but with attrition. By the 10th century, trade routes shifted. Silver from the Caliphate dwindled. Internal strife weakened the Khagans. In 965, Prince Sviatoslav of Kiev descended the Don with a fleet of longships and a hunger for glory. The Khazar fortress of Sakal fell, Atil burned. The river that had once mirrored starlight now carried ash. The kingdom of traders vanished, leaving behind fragments of rumor, Jewish communities scattered through Crimea, echoes of their tongue in the Caucasus, silver coins stamped with strange, prayer-like inscriptions. But the Khazars left more than ruins. They left a model: power through tolerance, profit through connection, identity through choice. On the steppe, where identity had always meant movement, they proved that faith could be a form of motion too, a journey inward rather than outward. Imagine the river after the fall, the current slow, the air smelling of reeds and smoke. A single rider pauses on the opposite bank, looking back at the ruins of Atil. He wears no crown, only a fur cloak and a pendant shaped like a six-pointed star. Behind him, the horizon glows with the same indifferent beauty it has shown every empire. He touches the pendant, whispers a prayer in a language half forgotten, and rides on, westward, as always. The steppe keeps its promise. Nothing lasts but the wind, and even the wind remembers. The Khazar's smoke drifts north into the forests, east into the deserts, west into the rivers that lead toward Byzantium and the heart of Europe. But the steppe does not mourn for long. It never does. The grass grows over the ashes, the wind forgets the names, and the rhythm begins again. Out of that rhythm rise two new waves of riders, the Pechenegs and the Kipchaks. People as ephemeral as weather, yet destined to shape centuries. The Pechenegs appear first, around the 9th century, a federation of clans from the Ural steppes pushed westward by drought and by the pressure of other nomads behind them. To the sedentary world, they arrive like ghosts, their origins obscure, their language kin to Turkic, but colored with echoes of the older Scythian plains. To themselves, they are simply Pechenek, brothers, tribes bound by oath and blood. Their land is the no man's land between rivers, the Volga, the Don, the Dniester, a vast sea of grass, known to Greek chroniclers as the desert of the Pechenegs. It is not desert at all, but a rolling ocean of green, where horses graze in herds so large that they look like shadows of clouds. Here the Pechenegs move like wind over water, each clan with its herds, wagons, and banners of animal totems. Their leaders rule by persuasion more than decree, their loyalty measured in gifts and shared danger. For a time, they dominate the trade routes once held by the Khazars. They tax caravans, escort merchants, and raid with exquisite timing. The Byzantines, ever pragmatic, recognize their value immediately. When the Rus' princes begin raiding Constantinople by river, the emperors of Byzantium send gold and titles to the Pechenegs, asking them to block the northern raiders. It works, for a while. In this era, the Pechenegs become both sword and shield. They fight as mercenaries for Byzantium, as allies of the Bulgars, as enemies of the Rus, and as enemies of each other. Their loyalty is not for sale exactly. It is situational. To a steppe mind, allegiance is a season, not a lifetime. They see no contradiction in shifting sides. A tribe survives by bending with the wind, not standing against it. Contemporary chroniclers struggle to understand them. To Byzantines, they were wild allies. To the Rus, terrifying raiders. To Arab geographers, the people between worlds. One Persian traveler wrote, "They have no cities, yet their tents are more splendid than the palaces of kings. They eat horse flesh and drink mare's milk, and their laughter carries across the steppe like thunder." But the Pechenegs, despite their fearsome reputation, were not monsters. They traded, farmed in river valleys, and even adopted Christian missionaries. Their chiefs sent sons to be educated in Constantinople, wearing Greek robes over steppe boots. Their women were known for their skill in weaving and diplomacy, often the negotiators between clans, and their songs, half lament, half lullaby, carried stories of exile and endurance, sung softly at night beside the fire. By the 10th century, the Pechenegs ruled a swath of land from the Don to the lower Danube. They were a force both admired and feared. Yet, as always, the steppes peace is temporary. Behind them, another people was gathering. The Kipchaks, known in Arabic sources as Kipchak, in Russian as Polovtsi, in European chronicles as Cumans. Their hair was said to be pale, their eyes like stormlight, their arrows unerring. The Kipchaks rose from the eastern steppes beyond the Aral Sea, pushing westward as climate shifted and competition grew. They absorbed what was left of the Oghuz Turks, the remnants of Uyghurs and Kyrgyz, forming a confederation vast and mobile. To them, the Pechenegs were merely the next wave to overtake. By the 11th century, the Kipchaks had done exactly that, sweeping across the steppe like a golden tide, scattering the Pechenegs into fragments. Those who survived fled to the Balkans, where some entered Byzantine service again. Others vanished into Slavic villages, their names turning into whispers in local folklore. In old Bulgarian songs, there are still traces, laments for dark-eyed horsemen who once rode from nowhere and were gone by dawn. The Kipchaks, meanwhile, inherited everything. Their domain stretched from the Irtysh River to the Danube, a realm so immense that chroniclers simply called it the Desht-i-Kipchak, the Kipchak steppe. They were the last great confederation before the Mongols, the final rehearsal before the grand performance of Genghis Khan. Unlike the Huns or the Gökturks, the Kipchaks did not seek empire in the traditional sense. Their power was decentralized, woven from tribal alliances, but their influence radiated in all directions. They traded with Russia's princes, raided Hungarian frontiers, and sold slaves to Islamic markets in the south. Kipchak warriors served in every army from Egypt to Kiev. Their sons became Mamluks in Cairo. Their daughters became queens in Byzantium. Their culture, like their range, was enormous. Their language formed the foundation of later Turkic dialects. Their music, mournful, percussive, influenced Slavic and Persian traditions alike. They adorned their saddles with silver, braided their hair with ribbons, and built stone statues of ancestors, Balbals, standing sentinel over the plains. Those statues still stand today, faces smoothed by centuries of wind, looking forever east, as if awaiting riders who never return. Religion, too, changed shape among them. Some clans embraced Islam through contact with Volga Bulgars. Others clung to Tengri, the sky god of their forebears. A few converted to Christianity through alliances with Rus. Yet all shared the same cosmology of motion. Life as a journey, death as a ride through the stars. Their politics were pragmatic. They intermarried with Russ's nobles, brokered truces, and sometimes acted as kingmakers. The princely feuds of Kievan Russes often turned on Kipchak support. But their strength, like every nomad empire before, carried the seed of its undoing. Unity was impossible for long. Rival chieftains rose, loyalty splintered, and beyond the horizon, new horsemen were gathering, quieter, deadlier, organized by a vision none had yet seen. The last great Kipchak Khan would live to see a dust storm rising from the east, thicker than any before. It was 1223 when they met the newcomers on the banks of the Kalka River, scouts of an empire not yet named in Europe. The battle was swift, the defeat absolute. The Mongols had arrived, and the age of the earlier nomads was ending. Still, the Pechenegs and Kipchaks were not forgotten. Their blood ran in every frontier people from Hungary to Anatolia. Their words lived on in place names, in proverbs, in songs. They were bridges, not ruins. The transition between the world of scattered tribes and the disciplined lightning that was to come. On some quiet night along the Dnieper, if you listen closely, you might still hear them. A faint echo of laughter and hoofbeats, the ghosts of those who moved between worlds, never belonging to one and yet belonging to all. The horizon darkens again, not with clouds, but with movement. Across the Gobi Desert, through the Orkhon Valley and the mountains of Kente, the air vibrates with the low rumble of hooves. It is the sound of inevitability, of a storm centuries in the making. For 1,000 years, the steppe has practiced its art, rising, falling, forgetting, and remembering. And now, at last, it is ready to perform it perfectly. The world is about to meet the Mongols. They begin not as conquerors, but as survivors. The late 12th century is an age of chaos in Mongolia. Dozens of clans, each claiming descent from ancient heroes, each raiding and retreating, bound by shifting loyalties and endless blood feuds. Among them, the Borjigin clan is small, almost invisible, living along the Onon River. Their herds are few, their allies fickle. It is a world where betrayal is as common as sunrise, where even kinship can turn to dust overnight. And from this fragile soil, a legend begins to take root. A boy named Temujin. He is born around 1162, in the midst of war, his first cry carried away by the wind that never stops blowing across Mongolia. His father, Yesuge, is a tribal chief, poisoned by rivals when Temujin is still a child. His mother, Hoelun, is left alone with her children, cast out by the clan. They survive by scraping bark from trees, by fishing in frozen rivers, by endurance. It is in hunger that Temujin learns the nature of loyalty, that it must be earned, not assumed. When he is captured and enslaved as a teenager, he escapes by loosening a wooden collar and running through the night. He hides in the grass, breath shallow, while his pursuers ride past. The moment he lifts his head and sees the stars again, he understands the first law of the steppe, that freedom is not given, only taken. Temujin grows into a man who trusts few, but listens to all. His charisma is magnetic, not the empty charm of a warlord, but the gravity of someone who sees the world as it could be. He gathers followers not through fear, but through fairness. He abolishes the old hierarchies of tribe and blood, replacing them with merit. To the steppe, this is revolutionary. A slave can rise to command 1,000 riders. A noble who betrays his oath can die nameless in the dust. He does not unite Mongolia by accident. He does it by redefining what it means to belong. The process is brutal. He fights the Taichiud, defeats the Tatars, humbles the Karet, destroys the Naiman. Each victory brings more followers, each loss more resolve. His alliances shift like sand, but his purpose never wavers. By 1206, at a great gathering of tribes near the source of the Onon River, he is proclaimed Chinggis Khan, universal ruler, under the eternal blue sky of Tengri. The scene must have been overwhelming. Tens of thousands of riders gathered in a vast circle, banners whipping in the wind, drums echoing off the mountains. A shaman blesses him with mare's milk, the sacred drink of the steppe, symbol of rebirth. The people bow their heads, and for the first time, all the clans of Mongolia stand under one will. The boy who once starved beside a frozen river now holds the destiny of half the earth. But this is not yet the empire of fear that later ages will remember. At its core, Chinggis's rule is about order, a code called the Yasa. It forbids theft, adultery, betrayal, and the killing of envoys. It rewards loyalty, discipline, and courage. In a world accustomed to chaos, he brings structure. His army is organized in tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Arban, Sun, Mingan, 2 men. Each loyal not to tribe, but to command. His strategy is as psychological as it is tactical. He uses speed like a blade, deception like armor. His messengers ride day and night, carrying orders across thousands of miles through a relay system so efficient it will later inspire the Pony Express. His intelligence network stretches across Asia. His generals can attack from 3 directions and arrive as one. The steppe has become an organism, a living empire made of motion. To his enemies, this efficiency looks like magic. When the Tangut kingdom of Xixia resists, he smashes it. When the mighty Jin dynasty underestimates him, he tears through northern China like a wildfire. His armies move faster than news, faster than comprehension. Each conquered people is absorbed, artisans spared and employed, soldiers integrated, scholars protected. The Mongols destroy cities, yes, but they also collect knowledge. At night, in his camp beside a river, Genghis Khan is said to sit silently, listening to the wind. He believes his power comes from Tengri, the eternal sky. But he also knows that fate is fragile. He tells his generals, "If you can't swallow the wind, you can't command it." They laugh nervously, unsure if he is joking. Perhaps he isn't. The legend of his rise spreads westward like rumor made flesh. In Persia, he is whispered about as a demon, in China as a heavenly scourge, in Europe as a horseman from prophecy. But to his people, he is something simpler and grander, the embodiment of balance between heaven and earth. The Mongols call him not conqueror, but restorer, the one who brought harmony to the steppe's restless heart. It is easy, from the safe distance of history, to see him only through the smoke of war. But consider the other truth. Under his rule, women could own property and command troops. Merchants rode safely across Asia for the first time in centuries. Laws were enforced without favoritism. Communication stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian in weeks. The empire of tents became a web of connection drawn tighter than any before. By 1227, when Chinggis dies, on campaign, still restless, still chasing the horizon, the world has changed forever. His generals will carry his vision farther than he lived to see, through Persia, to Russia, to the edges of Europe. But for now, the steppe breathes again, filled with the hum of horses and the scent of dust. The eternal blue sky has chosen its instrument, and the sound it makes is thunder. At night, when the wind moves through Mongolia's high grass, it sounds almost like chanting, a low, endless murmur. Perhaps it's only air, or perhaps it's the whisper of those riders still out there somewhere, galloping through eternity, chasing the light that never sets. The steppe is no longer only wind and rumor. It is now a drumbeat that shakes the earth. From the frozen lakes of Siberia to the gardens of Samarkand, from the walls of Kiev to the edge of the Caspian Sea, the hooves of Mongol horses carve a new geography, one that unites what was once divided and terrifies what once thought itself immortal. The empire of Genghis Khan has begun to expand, and the world, for the first time, becomes one connected battlefield. After his death in 1227, his body is buried in secret somewhere near the Onon River, wrapped in felt and surrounded by silence. Tradition says that the burial party killed every witness on the way home so that the great Khan might sleep undisturbed. The eternal blue sky is his only tombstone, but the empire he built refuses to rest. His sons and generals inherit not just land, but purpose, a sense that the entire world must be made to move under the same wind. At the head of this second wave stands Ögedei, Chinggis's third son. Deliberate, methodical, less a warrior than an organizer. Under him, the Mongol Empire transforms from a conqueror's dream into a functioning organism. He builds Karakorum, a capital in the heart of Mongolia, a city of wood and stone where tents once stood. It is both court and camp. Persian artisans carve palaces. Chinese engineers build canals. Buddhist monks chant beside shamanic fire pits. Diplomats from Europe arrive bewildered, writing home that the barbarians have made a Rome of their own. Yet Karakorum is not the center of the world. The world itself is. The Mongols do not think in borders, but in networks. They perfect the Yam system, a chain of relay stations across thousands of miles, each with fresh horses and supplies. Messages that once took months now travel in days. It is the first global communication network since the ancient Persians, only faster, more efficient, and more disciplined. Along it flow not only orders, but knowledge, maps, letters, trade deals, even poetry. Ögedei's generals move outward like spokes of a wheel. To the east, they finish the conquest of northern China, toppling the Jin dynasty in 1234. To the west, they push through Transoxiana into Persia and beyond. The most brilliant of these commanders is Subutai, the man historians will later call the greatest strategist who ever lived. Subutai never fights where he cannot win. He studies rivers, winds, and seasons. He sends scouts months ahead. He makes the impossible seem effortless. His armies cross mountains once thought impassable, ford rivers at night, and appear where no road exists. In 1236, a massive western campaign begins. Chinggis's grandsons Batu and Guyuk lead their Tumans into the forests of Russia. The cities of the Kievan Ruses fall one by one: Ryazan, Vladimir, Suzdal. Their wooden walls burn like matchsticks under the dry winter wind. The Mongols fight with eerie calm, their drums slow and steady, their arrows singing like insects. They do not stay. They simply erase and move on. By 1240, Kiev itself, the mother of Russian cities, lies in ruin. The Dnieper runs dark with ash. But this is only the prelude. In 1241, they reach Europe proper. Poland, Hungary, Bohemia, names once safe behind forests and castles, find themselves facing an enemy that moves like weather. At Legnica, they annihilate a coalition of Teutonic knights and Polish lords. At Mohi, they destroy the Hungarian army, despite being outnumbered. Witnesses describe the sky darkening under a storm of arrows, the ground trembling under the charge of cavalry armored in silk and steel. The Mongols feint retreat, lure their enemies across rivers, then strike from every side. It is not war, it is choreography, and then, as suddenly as they came, they vanish. In late 1241, word reaches Europe. The great Khan Ögedei is dead. The Mongol generals, bound by law, must return to Mongolia for the election of his successor. The armies retreat across the steppe, leaving behind smoking cities and stunned survivors who whisper that angels must have intervened. In truth, it was bureaucracy, the Yasa, demanding order even in victory. Europe breathes again, but the reprieve is temporary. The Mongols will return. For now, they consolidate their control of the east. Under Mongke, another of Chinggiz's grandsons, the empire reaches its administrative peak. Governors are appointed, census rolls compiled, taxes standardized. Merchants receive official protection. Caravans move safely from Beijing to Baghdad. It is as if the Silk Road itself has been reborn under new management, one run by horsemen who despise corruption but adore efficiency. Marco Polo, a century later, will describe this system with awe. There is no corner of the world, he writes, where a man may not travel safely under the Khan's seal. For the first time in history, a merchant can cross Eurasia without needing a sword. It is an empire of paradox. Born in conquest, sustained by order. And beneath that order, a kind of fragile peace takes root. Chinese astronomers correspond with Persian scholars. Venetian traders meet Mongol princes. Nestorian Christians preach beside Buddhist temples. The Mongols, pragmatic to the core, allow every faith its place, as long as its followers pay their taxes and cause no trouble. Under their watch, the old divisions of East and West blur. The known world becomes, briefly, a single conversation. Still, the memory of their violence never fades. Survivors in Baghdad or Kiev or Nishapur tell their grandchildren of cities erased in days, of rivers clogged with bodies. The Mongols did not invent cruelty, but they industrialized it. They wove fear into their strategy. Submit and live, their envoys would say. Resist and remember only silence. Many cities chose the silence, yet to the Mongols, this was not savagery, but balance, a harsh necessity to bring harmony under heaven. They believed that if the world resisted unity, it must be purified by fire before peace could reign. Chinggis had seen it that way. His heirs inherited both his conviction and his blindness. Imagine the steppe at night in those years. From Hungary to China, the horizon glows with distant campfires, an arch of flame beneath the same vast sky. Somewhere in Karakoram, a scribe writes the Khan's decrees by candlelight. Somewhere else, a shepherd in Georgia watches the stars and wonders if they too belong to the Mongols now. For a brief, impossible century, the world feels smaller, not safer, but connected, drawn together by the rhythm of hooves and the authority of heaven. When dawn breaks over the plains, it is silent except for wind and the clink of horse harnesses. The empire of motion has reached its fullest stride. The next generation, Kublai, Hulagu, and the rest, will carry it farther still, not just with swords, but with cities, laws, and dreams of permanence. And that, as history always proves, will be both its glory and its undoing. The empire now stretches so far that no sunrise can touch its entirety at once. From Korea's misted coasts to the vineyards of Hungary, it breathes like a living organism, a body of wind and order, connected by the steady pulse of hooves. The Mongols have achieved what no people before them dared to imagine. The steppe has swallowed the world, and yet, even at its height, the empire begins to change. The sons and grandsons of Chinggis Khan will carry his flame into palaces and courts, into cities of stone and silk. And in that transformation lies both brilliance and decay. After Ogedai's death and a turbulent interregnum, Power consolidates again under Monka, a grandson with his grandfather's resolve, but a scholar's patience. Under him, the Mongols formalized the structure of empire: taxes, postal routes, governors, and codified law. It is an age of efficiency. The steppe's rhythm turned into administration. The yam postal system grows denser. Every 50 miles stands a station with fresh horses, yurts stocked with food, and guards to protect travelers. Imperial seals guarantee safety to those carrying the Khan's order, known as paitsa. A merchant holding one can cross mountains, deserts, and borders unchallenged. A passport centuries ahead of its time. Monka's reign is practical but brief. In 1259, he dies during a campaign in China, and the empire fractures again along the seams of inheritance. His brothers, Kublai and Hulagu, each carry pieces of the dream in opposite directions. One eastward toward the dragon throne of China, the other westward towards the cradle of civilization itself. Mesopotamia, Hulagu, fierce yet cultured, leads a massive army through Persia. His banners are embroidered with wolves and eagles. His soldiers include Mongols, Turks, and even Chinese engineers who bring siege machines that hurl boulders the size of oxen. Their destination, Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic world, seat of the Abbasid Caliphate for 5 centuries. When Hulagu's army arrives in 1258, Baghdad is unprepared. Its walls, built for smaller wars, cannot withstand the Mongol engines. For 7 days, fire rains from the sky. The Tigris turns black with ink from shattered libraries. The House of Wisdom, where once the stars were mapped, the numbers perfected, the verses written. When the smoke clears, a civilization's memory is adrift. Scholars later say the river ran dark with knowledge and blood. To the Mongols, this is justice. The empire of heaven removing corruption from earth. But to the world, it feels like apocalypse. Hulagu does not destroy everything. He builds anew. From the ruins, he forges the Ilkhanate, a Mongol-Persian dynasty that will rule Iran and Mesopotamia for a century. His court in Tabriz gleams with mosaic and calligraphy. His descendants convert to Islam, patronize Persian poets, and rebuild the architecture they once burned. In their hands, the Mongol fire becomes light. Meanwhile, far to the east, Kublai Khan dreams of a different destiny. He is not content to be lord of tents. He wants to be emperor of cities. In 1260, he declares himself Great Khan, though not all Mongols agree. His legitimacy is contested, but his vision is clear. He will complete the conquest of China and rule as the new son of heaven. The steppe wind will sit on the dragon throne. For years, Kublai wages war against the southern Song dynasty, whose cities glitter like pearls along the Yangtze. The struggle is long and brutal, fought across rivers and swamps unfamiliar to the steppe cavalry. But the Mongols learn fast. They adopt Chinese naval technology, engineers and bureaucrats. Their siege machines thunder across rice fields. Their warships darken the rivers. By 1279, the last Song fortress falls. A child emperor drowns himself in the sea rather than surrender. Kublai stands victorious, master of the most populous empire on earth. He names his dynasty Yuan, meaning origin of the universe. His capital, Ganbalik, the city we now call Beijing, becomes a marvel of planning and cosmopolitan energy. Streets are straight as arrows. Markets hum with traders from every corner of the world. Marco Polo, visiting in the 1270s, describes it with astonishment. Marble bridges, fragrant gardens, silken courtiers, and a ruler whose presence is as the sun among lesser lights. Yet beneath that magnificence, something shifts. Kublai has brought the steppe into the palace, but in doing so, he has caged it. The freedom that once defined Mongol life, the vast mobility, the simplicity of the open sky, gives way to bureaucracy and ceremony. The riders who once judged themselves by their skill with the bow now measure themselves by rank and etiquette. The empire grows richer, but less wild, powerful, but less alive. Still, Kublai's achievements are immense. He reforms China's tax system, restores the Grand Canal, introduces paper money backed by imperial decree, and invites scholars from across Asia and Europe. Under his rule, science, medicine, and art flourish. Buddhism becomes the state religion, but Taoism and Islam are tolerated. Even Christian missionaries are allowed to preach. For a moment, his court feels like the world gathered under one roof, but time erodes harmony. The empire's size is both triumph and torment. Communication falters. Distant governors act like kings. Corruption spreads. Mongol rule, once based on equality between conqueror and conquered, becomes stratified. In the countryside, farmers bear heavy taxes. In the north, steppe nobles crumble at their loss of freedom. The sky's empire has turned inward, weighed down by its own gravity. Even the Mongol spirit of invincibility falters. Kublai's fleets, built to invade Japan in 1274 and again in 1281, are smashed by typhoons, the kamikaze, or divine winds. For the first time, the eternal blue sky says no. The Mongols, who conquered from the Carpathians to the Pacific, cannot conquer the sea. The winds that once carried them forward now scatter their ships like leaves. In his later years, Kublai grows weary. His empire still glitters, but its pulse slows. He mourns his wife Chabi, his generals, even his horses. In his palace, surrounded by silk and incense, he sometimes looks towards the north, toward Mongolia, toward the land of his grandfather, and feels the pull of the open sky. He orders his servants to bring him mare's milk, the taste of his youth. A king, he murmurs, must still remember the steppe. When he dies in 1294, the Yuan Empire remains vast, but the old unity is gone. The Mongol world fractures into Khanates, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan in China. Each follows its own path, its own rhythm. Together, they still rule the largest empire the earth has ever seen. But the wind no longer moves in one direction. The sky, though eternal, is beginning to turn. If you stand today in the ruins of Karakorum, or under the marble arches of Beijing, or beside the quiet Tigris, you can still feel it. The lingering hum of the Mongol age. The grass may have reclaimed the camps, but the world they shaped remains. A world connected by road and trade, by idea and motion, by the whisper that under heaven all things are one. When Kublai Khan's heart stopped beating in 1294, the wind that had once unified the steppe broke into four directions. The empire of the sky divided itself into fragments of sunset. Four great Khanates, each bearing the memory of Chinggis, but none his will. From the Danube to the Pacific, the banners still fluttered, but they no longer belonged to one storm. They were four separate winds, circling each other, colliding, drifting apart. To the west lay the Golden Horde, sprawling across the plains of Russia, its capital at Sarai on the Volga River. It was founded by Batu Khan, grandson of Chinggis, who had led the Mongol thunder into Europe half a century earlier. Sarai became a city of paradox, half tent, half palace, alive with the sound of prayers in Turkic, Persian, and Slavic. Carpets from Samarkand mingled with furs from Novgorod. The Volga shimmered with merchant barges. The Golden Horde ruled not by presence, but by pressure. Its Khans did not govern the Russes directly. They made princes kneel, pay tribute, and rise again as vassals. It was subjugation with a handshake, domination by taxation. To the south, across Persia and Mesopotamia, stretched the Ilkhanate, the empire founded by Hulagu and his heirs. Their cities, Tabriz, Maraga, Sultaniya, glowed with the rediscovered beauty of Persian art. The Ilkhans rebuilt observatories, patronized poets, and sponsored translations of Aristotle and Avicenna. They employed Chinese astronomers, Syriac theologians, and Armenian architects. It was as though the libraries burned in Baghdad had been reborn in class and geometry. By the 14th century, the Ilkhans themselves had become Persians in everything but name. To the center lay the Chagatai Khanate, stretching from the Oxus to the Altai, a region of oases, mountains, and endless argument. Chagatai, the second son of Chinggis, had been stern and lawful, obsessed with the yasa. His descendants inherited the territory, but not his discipline. The Khanate became a patchwork of rival factions, yet it was also a cradle of synthesis. Here, Turkic and Persian languages fused into what would become Chagatai Turkish, the language of poets and scholars. Here, too, Islam spread across Central Asia, mingling with older sky worship, until the two became indistinguishable. And to the east, in China, remained the Yuan dynasty, Kublai's creation, still glittering but already cracking. The Mongol court in Khan Malik grew luxurious, surrounded by eunuchs, courtiers, and scholars who whispered more than they rode. The steppe within them was fading. Taxes grew heavy, famines frequent. The very infrastructure that once symbolized imperial efficiency now weighed like stone on the people's shoulders. For a few decades, these Khanates coexisted uneasily, cousins by blood, rivals by ambition. They traded ambassadors, gifts, and insults. Once or twice, they even dreamed of reunion. Letters flew between Khans, invoking Chinggis's spirit, urging harmony, but distance and pride had already done their work. The unity of the steppe was gone. Still, the world that Chinggis had forged did not dissolve with his family's quarrels. It evolved. Trade surged along the newly stabilized routes. Ideas traveled faster than swords. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, as later historians would call it, turned Eurasia into a single, vast marketplace. Silk, spices, porcelain, and glass crossed deserts once deadly. With them came mathematics, medicine, and myth. Paper money circulated from China to Samarkand. Even the Black Death, centuries later, would trace its terrible path along these arteries. The Mongols had connected the world so thoroughly that not even plague could move without their roads. The Khans themselves became symbols of adaptation. In Persia, Ghazan Khan converted to Islam in 1295, turning his realm into a center of piety and learning. Under him, Persian became the language of administration, calligraphy, the art of power. Yet the Mongol instinct for efficiency remained. Ghazan reformed the calendar, standardized weights and measures, and founded hospitals. The empire that once measured its success in miles now measured it in minds. In the West, the Golden Horde shifted shape again and again. Its people, Turkic-speaking by the 14th century, mixed freely with Slavs and Volga tribes. Islam took root here too, brought by merchants and missionaries. The Khans adopted its laws, but kept the old nomadic pragmatism. In their tents, the Quran lay beside the bow. Their mosques stood open to the wind, their muezzins calling prayers across the same fields, once drenched in battle. The horde's influence reached deep into Eastern Europe. Russian princes traveled to Sarai to receive their Yarlik, a charter of authority stamped with the Khan's seal. Some bowed humbly, others schemed in secret. Over time, a new kind of strength grew from this submission. Moscow, a small and cautious principality, learned from its masters, their discipline, their taxation, their patience. One day, it would inherit their empire in all but name. Farther east, in the Chagatai lands, cities like Kashgar and Samarkand became way stations of brilliance. Under the Mongols, the Silk Road achieved its golden age. Travelers like Ibn Battuta, journeying from Morocco to China, marveled at the safety and order of these routes. Caravanserais dotted the deserts. Postal riders galloped night and day. Even when politics faltered, the roads endured. Arteries of exchange pumping life between civilizations that had never before spoken so freely. In China, however, the Mongol dream grew heavy with its own grandeur. The Yuan emperors, increasingly removed from their nomadic roots, found themselves strangers in their own throne rooms. Rebellions flared, led by farmers burdened by taxes and mystics preaching the wrath of heaven. In 1368, after nearly a century of Mongol rule, the Red Turban Rebellion swept the land. A peasant monk's son, Zhu Yuanzhang, drove the last Yuan emperor north and founded the Ming dynasty. The Mongols retreated to the steppe, back to their origin, their sanctuary. And so the wheel turned again. The sky reclaimed its riders, the earth its cities. The steppe breathed out the empires it had once breathed in. The Mongols, who had ruled the world, returned to the rhythm of herding and horizon. Yet they were not gone, only diffused like mist after rain. Their language and genes, their trade routes and technologies remained everywhere. If you could have stood on the Volga in the 14th century and looked east, you would have seen the afterglow of their greatness. 1,000 campfires stretching into infinity. Each one told a story. A former soldier, now a merchant. A Khan, now a scholar. A lineage, now legend. The steppe was quiet again, but under its silence ran the hum of connection. The memory of a time when the world moved to a single rhythm. And even as the Khanates aged and fractured, a new kind of empire, one of language, faith, and memory, was forming in their wake. The world would never again be as divided as it was before the Mongols rode. The horse had done its work. The sky, for now, could rest. By the 14th century, the steppe seems to exhale again. Its horizon, once alive with Mongol banners, grows still. The great Khans are gone. Their empires have either fractured or dissolved into their surroundings. The Golden Horde splinters into rival domains. The Ilkhanate fades into Persian dynasties. China pushes the Yuan north into exile. For a moment, a rare, delicate moment, it feels as though the grasslands have quieted. But in the steppe, quiet is never peace. It is only the breath before thunder. The wind begins to gather again in Central Asia, curling around the ruins of Samarkand, the crossroads of 100 vanished empires. In the bazaars, traders still sell silk and spices, but the songs they sing are of loss, of cities gone, of rulers forgotten. The old Mongol roads are still there, but cracked, the caravanserais half buried in dust. The steppe waits for a new rhythm, a new rider to summon it to motion. That rider comes from Transoxiana, from the rocky plains near Kesh, a man born not into Khan blood, but into ambition. His name is Timur, though the world will call him Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, conqueror of half the known earth. He is not Mongol by lineage, but he claims descent from Genghis Khan through marriage, invoking the authority of the ancient sky. He is Turkic in speech, Islamic in faith, and steppe-born in spirit. He rides with the cold patience of one who has studied both empire and emptiness. The world into which he rides is fragmented. Petty khans, squabbling sultans, city-states without unity. Timur's genius is to make their disunity his weapon. His rise begins, as all great storms do, almost invisibly. A skirmish here, an alliance there. By 1370, he seizes Samarkand, declaring it the center of his domain. He does not rebuild it yet. He feeds it first with conquest. Like Genghis before him, he reorganizes tribes into disciplined units, commands armies that move with both precision and poetry. His banners bear Quranic verses. His messengers carry both scimitars and promises. Under the sky of God, he tells his men, there is no rest for those born to move. The campaigns that follow are a paradox of beauty and terror. In Persia, he burns cities that resist and rebuilds those that submit. In 1387, he captures Isfahan. When its citizens revolt, he orders the construction of towers made from human skulls. A grim warning, but also a statement. Chaos will not survive order. Yet from those ashes, he commissions mosques, gardens, and libraries. His cruelty is methodical, his patronage sincere. Timur is not merely a conqueror, he is an artist of empire. He dreams not of endless expansion, but of permanence. A steppe empire that will leave monuments of marble rather than memories of dust. His Samarkand becomes a jewel, blue-tiled domes glittering like captured sky, minarets rising like the masts of anchored ships. Architects from Shiraz, artisans from Delhi, calligraphers from Baghdad, all brought here by force or fortune. Built for him, a city that breathes both terror and grace. His armies move in spirals through Afghanistan, India, Syria, and Anatolia, carving crescents of conquest. In 1398, he invades Delhi, defeating the Sultan with precision so brutal that the city burns for days. Chroniclers write that the sun itself dimmed from the smoke of corpses. Yet a year later, Timur's court poets describe him not as destroyer, but as restorer of divine justice. For him, devastation is cleansing. The empire, like a sword, must be reforged in fire. Westward, he faces the rising Ottomans, a new power born from the ruins of Seljuk and Byzantine worlds. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Timur's armies crush Sultan Bayezid III. The Sultan is taken captive, the Ottoman dream halted for a generation. Timur's legend expands beyond geography. To Christian Europe, he becomes both fascination and phantom, a pagan scourge turned possible ally against Islam. To Muslims, he is both warrior of faith and breaker of mosques. To the steppe, he is the wind remembered. And yet, beneath his victories, the old steppe truth endures. Every empire sows its own impermanence. Timur's power depends on him alone. His sons quarrel, his generals conspire, his conquests stretch too far to hold. In 1405, at 70 years old, he prepares one last campaign against China, seeking to rival even Genghis Khan. But in the cold of winter near Otrar, he falls ill. The man who conquered from the Indus to the Bosporus dies in a tent, his breath leaving him in clouds that fade into the night air. They bury him in Samarkand, beneath a slab of green jade. The inscription reads, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." It is not entirely a metaphor. His descendants, the Timurid princes, will not command empires of horse and fire, but of ink and art. They will build schools, libraries, and observatories. From their lineage will come Ulugh Beg, the astronomer king who charts the stars more precisely than anyone before him, and Babur, the poet warrior who will carry their blood into India to found the Mughal dynasty. Timur's sword will become a pen, his dust reborn as marble and verse. If Genghis Khan taught the world the speed of movement, Timur teaches it the persistence of culture, that even empire, born of violence, can leave behind beauty. Samarkand, his masterpiece, endures. The turquoise domes still gleam under sunlight. The calligraphy still whispers, "This too was heaven's will." At night, when the desert cools and the stars bloom over Registan Square, you can almost hear the echoes of hammers and hooves, the sigh of wind between the minarets. The steppe has entered its reflective age. It no longer shouts its power. It hums it quietly, through geometry, through memory, through art. The horizon remains wide, the sky unbroken. But now the riders have learned that sometimes, to move eternally, you must also learn how to stay. The thunder of conquest fades to a softer rhythm. Parchment, poetry, the hum of scholars beneath tiled domes. The steppe has entered an age of echo. After Timur's death, in 1405, the world of nomadic empire begins to shift inward, from horse to book, from sword to script. The children of the riders learn to rule not through fire, but through knowledge. The sky that once thundered with hooves now glows with the light of lanterns reflected on manuscripts. Samarkand, reborn from conquest, becomes the pulse of this new world. The air smells of ink and roses. Madrasas rise like palaces. Students from Cairo, Shiraz, and Bukhara debate astronomy and philosophy under the turquoise shadow of the Registan. In the observatory of Ulugh Beg, Timur's grandson, the stars are charted with precision unseen since Alexandria. He measures the tilt of the earth within minutes of modern accuracy, mapping constellations once worshipped by steppe priests. His instruments are not bronze idols, but marble arcs aimed at infinity. For Ulugh Beg, the sky is not a god to be feared, but a book to be read. He walks each night among the domes of Samarkand, murmuring equations in the same cadence his ancestors once used for war chants. The heavens move as the horses of the ancients once did. He writes, swift, silent, and without error. His empire is made of numbers. Yet even as scholarship blooms, the political map fractures again. The Timurid princes, each hungry for glory, divide Central Asia into a chessboard of short-lived thrones. In Herat, the poet Jami writes verses of mystical love. In Tabriz, miniature painters gild the margins of Persian epics. In Samarkand, calligraphers inscribe Quranic verses in gold. It is an age of refinement built on the bones of warriors. The sword and pen have become partners, one drawing blood, the other meaning. Meanwhile, far to the north, the steppe continues its eternal rearrangement. The Golden Horde, once the vast northern limb of Mongol power, has begun to wither. Its khans grow weak, their vassals restless. Among the forests of Muscovy, a new kind of state, still small, still cautious, begins to imitate the order of its former masters. The Russians adopt the Mongol census, their postal routes, their taxation. They build wooden fortresses where Mongol governors once camped. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the empire of the riders becomes the empire of clerks. The horse gives way to the bureaucrat. In the south, the vacuum left by Timur draws in fresh powers. The Ottomans, freed from their defeat at Ankara, recover and expand. Their sultans master the balance between nomadic vigor and urban administration, blending steppe heritage with Islamic statecraft. The Mamluks in Egypt, descendants of Kipchak and Cuman slaves, rule with precision learned from their nomad ancestors. In India, Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, dreams of reclaiming his lost Central Asian home. In 1526, he crosses the Khyber Pass and founds the Mughal Empire, a garden of marble and poetry that will stand for centuries. Babur is the last true steppe emperor in spirit. In his memoirs, the Baburnama, he writes, not of glory but of longing. The smell of grass after rain, the taste of mare's milk, the sound of wind in the tents of his childhood. In Hindustan, he sighs, there is no good air, no good horses, no good flesh. Yet from this homesickness grows something transcendent. The Mughals will bring Persian art, Turkish architecture, and Mongol engineering into harmony. The Taj Mahal, white as bone, serene as the steppe moon, is their final hymn to impermanence. By now, the nomadic ideal has entered the bloodstream of civilization itself. The steppes people no longer need to conquer to be everywhere. They have already woven themselves into the languages, laws, and legends of half the world. The very words for Khan, yurt, horse, caravan, sable, and steppe travel across continents, crossing tongues like wind over grass. What was once frontier has become foundation. In Central Asia, however, the heartland begins to close in on itself. The Silk Road, that shimmering artery of the old world, falters under new competition. European ships, hugging coastlines, discover faster ways to connect east and west. The ocean becomes the new steppe. Caravans grow fewer, caravanserais fall to ruin. The deserts reclaim the roads once kept alive by Mongol and Turkic riders. Samarkand, once a beacon of global trade, becomes a beautiful relic, its domes still bright, but its streets quieter. Still, even decline has grace here. The Timurid legacy turns inward, into art and mysticism. The poets of this age, Navoy, Jami, and later Rumi's disciples, see the journey not across land, but within the soul. The horse becomes a metaphor for yearning, the horizon for enlightenment. The rider, writes Navoy, travels not toward the world, but toward himself. It is the final transformation of the nomadic idea, from physical conquest to spiritual movement. By the 16th century, the great cities of the steppe world, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, shine like fading stars. They are no longer capitals of empire, but sanctuaries of memory. Traders still pass through, whispering stories of the seas beyond. Pilgrims rest beneath turquoise domes that echo with prayer. The grasslands outside remain quiet, dotted with shepherds who sing old epics beside their fires. Somewhere, an old man tells his grandson of Genghis Khan, and the boy listens wide-eyed, not knowing whether it was all history or dream. In a sense, both. For history on the steppe has always been circular, like the hooves that trace the earth, returning to the same horizon again and again. The empire of movement has become a philosophy, carried in stories rather than swords. Even as the rest of the world builds walls, the steppe continues to teach impermanence. that all things, cities, dynasties, lives, exist only between gusts of wind. If you stand tonight in Samarkand and look up, you might see what Ulugh Beg once saw, the stars suspended like the pearls of a lost bridle. The air is cold, the grass whispering. The sky seems infinite, but familiar. For beneath that same sky, from Scythians to Mongols to Mughals, one truth has never changed. Everything moves, everything returns, and the horizon never ends. By the 17th century, the Song of Hooves has grown faint, not silenced, but softened into history's undertone. The age of the great nomadic empires has faded, yet their descendants still ride the edges of civilization, shaping it quietly. The world they once united through conquest is now connected by trade winds, maps, and memory. But the steppe, vast and breathing, remains. The same sky, the same restless grass, waiting for movement. The modern powers of the early modern age, the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, and the Russians, now surround the steppe like tightening borders on a map. The open horizon that once stretched unbroken from the Carpathians to the Pacific is slowly carved by treaties, forts, and fences. Yet the spirit of the riders endures in ways less visible, but no less enduring. In Central Asia, the heirs of the Timurids rule small Khanates, Bukhara, Khiva, Kokand, cities of silk and sand that glitter like fragments of an old mirror. Their Khans trace their lineage to Genghis Khan, invoking his blessing over trade and prayer. Their power, though diminished, still flows with the pulse of caravan routes. The bazaars hum with Persian verse and Turkic bargaining. The domes above them shimmer in gold leaf. Outside the city walls, herds still graze, and riders still drift like clouds, though fewer with each passing decade. Farther north, the Russian Tsars expand across the Urals, sending soldiers and settlers into lands once ruled by horsemen. The Golden Horde is long gone, but its echo guides the conquerors. Moscow itself, the former vassal, now becomes empire. Its rulers borrow Mongol methods, tribute turned into tax, steppe routes turned into postal roads, local princes turned into bureaucrats. Ivan the Terrible and his successors learn what the Khans once knew: that to rule the steppe, one must understand its rhythm before one can restrain it. The Cossacks, descendants of runaway peasants and forgotten warriors, ride that rhythm. They are the new frontier people, half Russian, half steppe, living by sword, song, and stubborn independence. Their freedom frightens kings and fascinates poets. They carry within them a diluted but enduring spark of nomadic soul, loyalty to no one but the horizon. When they gallop through the tall grass of the Don and the Volga, the wind still sounds like an old refrain, the language of the horse, the whisper of empire long gone. Meanwhile, across the Kazakh plains, new confederations rise. The Kazakhs, descended from the Mongols, Kipchaks, and Turks, form their own hordes, great, middle, and lesser. They roam from the Altai to the Caspian, fierce and proud, their yurts white under the sun, their music filled with melancholy. Their poets sing of Chinggis as ancestor, of Tengri as the sky that still judges all. Though pressured by Russia from the north and by Dzunga tribes from the east, they remain the last guardians of pure steppe life. Mobile, musical, defiant. In the west, the Crimean Tatars carry another flame. As vassals of the Ottoman Empire, they ride as warriors and raiders across the Ukrainian plains. Their capital, Bakhchisarai, is a palace of roses and fountains where poets write of loyalty and loss. The Tatars are the final bridge between the nomadic and the civilized, between the tent and the mosque, the bow and the book. Their raids on Poland and Muscovy echo the old steppe thunder, but each year their strength wanes. When Catherine the Great annexes Crimea in 1783, the last free Khanate of the West falls silent. By now, the steppe's role has changed. Once the center of the world's energy, it has become its periphery. The wind that once carried warriors now carries wheat. The horses are replaced by caravans of merchants, and soon by railroads. Yet even as the industrial age begins to rise elsewhere, the people of the steppe continue to live by the laws of the sky: honor, hospitality, endurance. They have learned to survive every empire because they have never truly depended on one. In the east, the Mongols themselves retreat into isolation. The Yuan dynasty's fall has driven them north again to their ancestral plains. They are now divided among clans under the shadow of foreign powers, Ming, then Manchu. The Great Wall, once useless against their ancestors, now stands more as a monument to memory than defense. Inside it, China thrives. Beyond it, the descendants of Chinggis keep their songs and their pride. Lamaseries rise beside ancient burial mounds. Mongol princes convert to Tibetan Buddhism, painting the sky god Tengri with a new face, still eternal, still blue. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Europe has begun to rewrite history. To them, the steppe becomes a myth, a realm of barbarians, a cautionary tale about chaos and empire. The word Tatar becomes shorthand for fear. Few remember that the Mongols also built the world's first global postal system, its safest trade routes, its widest peace. The narrative of destruction survives. The story of connection fades. But the land itself remembers. The grass that covers the old kurgans still grows richer where bones lie beneath. The wind that passes over the ruins of Sarai still hums through the hollows of collapsed walls. The patterns of migration, trade, and weather, all of them still follow the old maps. History's memory lingers in the soil like salt. By the 18th century, when European explorers and Russian scientists cross the steppe to map and measure it, they find what they call emptiness. They see nothing, and yet their journals speak of everything, of horizons too wide for the eye, of silence too vast for the mind. They write of the Kazakh riders who guide them with wordless confidence, of the Mongol herders who share their tents without question, of the wind that never stops moving. They come to quantify the steppe, but they end up describing awe. The ancient nomads had always known what the scientists rediscovered: that motion is life, and stillness, death. The steppe doesn't need monuments because the sky itself is one, infinite, eternal, reflecting every empire that has passed beneath it like clouds. And so, as the world grows louder, with factories, cannons, and cities of smoke, the steppe remains the quiet mirror of time. The empires that once rose from it have turned into nations with borders and flags, but their essence, that hunger for the horizon, that serenity in motion, still lingers. Tonight, if you stand where the Volga meets the Caspian, the wind will feel the same as it did in the age of Scythians and Mongols. It will brush past your face, cool and dry, carrying scents of salt and grass. You might close your eyes and, for a moment, hear the faint echo of riders, Not ghosts, but memory. Not history, but breath. The steppe does not vanish. It waits, forever between silence and thunder, teaching the world how to move and how to remember. The wind returns at dusk. It slides through the grasslands that once trembled under countless hooves, carrying only the faintest echoes of iron, smoke, and song. The empires are gone, the maps rewritten, but the steppe itself remains, unbroken, unbothered, breathing with the same ageless rhythm it held before the first rider ever saddled a horse. Civilizations have risen around its edges, Russia in the north, China in the east, Persia and the Ottomans to the south, all carving boundaries into the earth that the wind ignores. Yet beneath those borders lies something older and more enduring, the memory of motion. The eternal rider still exists, not in one people or one land, but in the deep pattern of humanity itself. Every empire that has grown out of the steppe, Scythian, Hunnic, Turkic, Mongol, Timurid, was a different verse in the same long song. Each believed in its moment that it had mastered the horizon. But mastery was never the point. The horizon is not meant to be owned. It is meant to be followed. The riders always knew this. Even at the height of their power, they built few monuments, for they understood that permanence belonged to the sky alone. If you walk now through Mongolia's Kurlan Valley, you can still see traces of the Orkan inscriptions carved by the Gökturks over 1,000 years ago. They are weathered almost to illegibility, yet the words endure. Let us not forget our ancestors. Let us remember the sky. That phrase could have been spoken by any nomad in any century. It is both prayer and promise, a way of keeping balance between memory and motion. Historians have long tried to define the secret of the steppe peoples, how a culture so decentralized, so fluid, could repeatedly reshape the world. The answer, perhaps, lies in that fluidity itself. Nomads did not worship permanence. They celebrated adaptability. When drought came, they moved. When empire rose, they traded. When the world closed its gates, they found another path around it. In a sense, their empire was never geography. It was possibility. Even now, fragments of their legacy pulse quietly through the modern world. The Mongol postal system became the ancestor of global communication networks. The trade routes they secured birthed globalization itself, centuries before the word existed. The genes of the steppe live in millions, in Tatars, Uzbeks, Hungarians, Turks, Kazakhs, even scattered among Europeans and East Asians. The words they carried, yurt, Khan, caravan, sable, steppe, remain in languages that no longer remember their origin, and still, their greatest gift is invisible. The way they taught humanity to think of connection as motion. To the farmers and city builders of the ancient world, stability was salvation. To the nomads, it was suffocation. They measured worth not by what they built, but by how far they could travel without losing themselves. That same instinct lives on wherever people chase freedom, wherever someone leaves behind the known in search of something that feels like the horizon. In the 19th century, when Russian explorers crossed the Kazakh plains by train for the first time, one of them wrote in his diary, "The grass moves as if remembering riders. The wind carries voices that do not belong to us." Perhaps he was right. The steppe remembers everything. Beneath every gust lies a whisper of hooves, of campfires, of songs that once drifted between tents. Today, satellites trace the same paths once followed by caravans. Airplanes fly where the Mongol postal riders galloped. The speed has changed, the medium too, but the principle remains. To move is to connect. In that sense, every highway, fiber cable, and trade route is the modern reincarnation of the old nomadic dream that the world, vast as it is, can be linked by motion and trust. Yet even as the world grows smaller, the step's wisdom feels larger than ever. It reminds us that impermanence is not failure, that wandering can be meaning, and that the things we try hardest to keep, power, territory, glory, will always belong to the wind in the end. What endures is the rhythm itself, the going, the returning, the horizon always receding just enough to beckon us forward. As night falls over the Eurasian plain, the stars bloom like embers across an ancient sky. The same constellations that guided the Scythians, the Turks, the Mongols still hang there, unmoved by centuries of change. A single horseman might still ride beneath them, a shepherd perhaps, humming to his herd. And in that sound lies the echo of 10,000 years. The eternal rider has not vanished. He has simply changed shape into the traveler crossing a border, the thinker chasing an idea, the soul that refuses to settle. So let the story end where it began, with the wind moving through endless grass, with the hush before sleep, with the whisper of the world's oldest truth, that everything passes and everything returns. The steppe does not mourn its empires. It dreams them endlessly.